The night Clara Whitmore's handmade dress was destroyed, she made a choice that would shake an entire town to its foundations. They thought breaking her would be easy. The elite daughters of Red Hollow had spent years perfecting their cruelty, and Clara, poor, plain, invisible Clara, seemed like the perfect victim. But what they didn't know was that sometimes the quietest people carry the deepest fire. And sometimes, one act of unexpected kindness can ignite a revolution. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's journey travels. The spring of 1882 arrived in Red Hollow like a promise nobody expected to keep. Clara Whitmore stood in front of the cracked mirror in her bedroom, her hands trembling as she held up the dress. 6 months of work. 6 months of stolen moments after 14-hour days at the boarding house, her fingers raw from needlework by candlelight, her eyes burning with exhaustion. The fabric wasn't fine. She couldn't afford fine. But it was clean, carefully pieced together from remnants she'd traded for or bought with coins saved one at a time. The dress was pale yellow, simple in design, but executed with the kind of desperate precision that comes from knowing you only get one chance. She'd reinforced every seam twice. She'd stayed up 3 nights straight, getting the hem exactly right. "You're really going to do this?" her younger sister Maggie asked from the doorway. 12 years old, all elbows and skepticism. "I'm going to try." "They'll eat you alive, Clara. You know they will." Clara's reflection stared back at her. Round face, thick waist, arms that had never known delicacy. 22 years of being too much in all the wrong ways, of taking up space in a world that preferred women to barely exist at all. 22 years of watching other girls drift through life like dandelion seeds while she plodded along like a plow horse. "Maybe," Clara said quietly, "but I'm tired of living like I'm already dead." The spring dance was the social event of Red Hollow's calendar, held in the old church on the hill. It was where engagements were announced, where reputations were made or shattered, where the carefully maintained hierarchy of frontier society put itself on display. Clara had never attended. Girls like her didn't attend. Girls like her stayed home, stayed quiet, stayed grateful for whatever scraps of existence they were permitted. But this year, something had shifted inside her. Maybe it was watching her mother's hands twist with arthritis, seeing her future written in those gnarled fingers. Maybe it was overhearing the boarding house guests talk about adventure and possibility, like they were birthright instead of fantasy. Maybe it was just the suffocating weight of invisibility finally becoming unbearable. She'd saved. She'd planned. She'd worked her fingers bloody making this dress. She was going to that dance. The church was already glowing with lamplight when Clara arrived, her dress carefully wrapped in clean muslin, her good shoes clutched in one hand. The spring evening was cool, sage and pine sharp in the air, and through the church windows she could see silhouettes moving, women in their finery, men in their best suits, the whole town transforming into something out of a storybook. Her stomach churned with acid fear. The ladies' dressing room was in the church basement, accessed by a narrow side entrance. This was where the town's women performed their final preparations, where they helped each other with buttons and hair, where they painted their lips with berry stain and pinched color into their cheeks. Clara had timed her arrival carefully, not so early that she'd be alone with the elite girls, not so late that she'd make an entrance. She miscalculated. The moment she descended those stairs, dress bundle in her arms, she knew she'd made a terrible mistake. The basement room was full, and not just full of exactly the wrong people. Evelyn Carter stood at the center like a queen holding court. 19 years old, butter blonde, daughter of the town's wealthiest merchant. Her dress was deep emerald silk that had cost more than Clara made in a year. Around her clustered her usual circle, daughters of the mayor, the banker, the railroad superintendent. Girls who'd never worked a day in their lives, whose biggest concern was whether their dance cards would fill up fast enough. They all turned when Clara entered. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Well," Evelyn said, her voice honey-sweet and sharp as a razor. "Look what the wind blew in." Clara's throat went tight. She should leave. She should turn around right now and climb those stairs and go home and forget this whole foolish idea, but her feet wouldn't move. 6 months of work, 6 months of hope. "I'm just here to change," Clara managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, we can see that," one of Evelyn's friends said. Margaret Sullivan, copper curls, and a mean streak wide as the Mississippi. "What do you have there? Let me guess, flour sack? Old curtains?" Laughter rippled through the group. Not loud, not cruel enough to be obvious, just enough to make Clara's face burn. "Leave her alone, Margaret," another voice said, but it was weak, performative. Nobody really wanted to cross Evelyn Carter. Clara moved toward the corner, trying to make herself small, trying to become invisible the way she'd perfected over 2 decades. She found a spot near the wash basin as far from the group as possible and began carefully unwrapping her dress. She should have known better. She should have known that distance meant nothing to people who'd made cruelty their sport. "Oh my," Evelyn said, drifting closer like a cat approaching a wounded bird. "Did you make that yourself?" Clara's hand stilled on the fabric. "Yes." "How industrious." Evelyn's eyes traveled over the dress with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. "You must have worked very hard on it." There was something in her tone, something that made Clara's instincts scream danger. But what could she do? Run? 'Cause a scene, she was already here, already exposed. "I did," Clara said quietly. "Such dedication," Margaret chimed in, moving to flank Evelyn's other side. "Such attention to detail. Why, I can barely see the uneven stitching from here." More laughter. Clara's hands trembled as she lifted the dress, preparing to slip behind the changing screen. That's when Evelyn moved. Later, Clara would replay it 1,000 times, trying to understand if it was planned or spontaneous, trying to make it make sense. But in the moment, it happened so fast she didn't even have time to react. Evelyn's hand shot out, grabbing the inkwell that sat on the nearby writing desk, the one the church secretary used for correspondence. In one fluid motion, she upended it. Black ink poured across Clara's yellow dress like blood. The world went silent. Or maybe Clara just stopped hearing. She watched the ink spread, soaking into the fabric she'd spent 6 months perfecting, turning her careful work into a ruined, dripping mess. The ink seemed to move in slow motion, creeping across seams and hems, destroying everything it touched. "Oh no!" Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in perfectly performed shock. "I'm so sorry. It slipped. It just slipped right out of my hand." Clara couldn't breathe. She stared at the dress, her hope, her one chance, and felt something inside her chest crack apart. "How clumsy of me," Evelyn continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "And you worked so hard on it, too. What a terrible accident." The other girls had gone quiet. A few looked uncomfortable, but nobody spoke. Nobody called it what it was. Nobody defended her. Clara's vision blurred. She clutched the ruined fabric, ink staining her fingers, her dress, her skin. 6 months. 6 months of exhausted evenings and bleeding fingers and desperate, foolish hope. Gone. Destroyed in seconds by a girl who probably spent more on hair ribbons than Clara made in a month. "I think," Clara's voice came out strangled, "I think I need some air." She didn't wait for a response. She gathered the destroyed dress in her arms, ink still dripping, and stumbled toward the stairs. Behind her, she heard whispers erupting, excited, scandalized, delighted whispers. This would be the story of the night. Poor Clara Whitmore, thinking she belonged, getting exactly what she deserved. The evening air hit her face like a slap. Clara made it approximately 10 feet from the church entrance before her legs gave out. She collapsed against the side of the building, sliding down the rough wood until she was sitting in the dirt, the ruined dress pooled around her like an accusation. Then she started to cry. Not delicate tears. Not quiet, ladylike weeping. Clara sobbed like something was being torn out of her chest. Great, heaving gasps that shook her whole body, tears and snot running down her face, all the dignity she'd been trying to maintain dissolving into raw, animal grief. She'd been so stupid, so incredibly, pathetically stupid, thinking she could just show up and belong, thinking that a nice dress would somehow transform her into someone worthy of existing in their world, thinking that maybe, just maybe, she deserved one night of beauty. The worst part wasn't the dress. The dress could be replaced, theoretically. The worst part was the hope, that fragile, desperate hope that had kept her going through 6 months of exhausting work, the hope that she could be seen as something other than a joke, a burden, an object of pity, or scorn. That hope was ruined now, just as thoroughly as the dress. Clara didn't know how long she sat there, long enough for the sky to deepen from pink to purple, long enough for the music to start inside the church, violins and piano floating out into the evening, long enough for her tears to slow from sobs to silent streams running down her cheeks. She should go home. She should pick herself up and walk away and forget this whole disaster. But she couldn't seem to move. She just sat there, covered in ink and tears, staring at nothing. "That looks like a real bad night you're having." The voice startled her so badly she nearly fell over. Clara's head jerked up to see a man standing a few feet away, mostly silhouette against the darkening sky. Not just any man. Caleb Rourke. Everyone in Red Hollow knew Caleb Rourke, even if most preferred to pretend they didn't. He was a mountain man in an era when mountain men were becoming obsolete. One of those hard, self-sufficient types who lived up in the high country, who showed up in town maybe 4 times a year to trade pelts and buy supplies and remind everyone that civilization was still just a thin veneer over wilderness. He was probably in his early 30s, though it was hard to tell with men like him. Hard-living aged you. He had dark hair pulled back with a leather cord, several days of beard growth, and the kind of weathered face that came from spending more time with trees than people. He was dressed for town, relatively clean shirt, trousers without obvious holes, but he still radiated a kind of raw, uncomfortable presence. Clara had never spoken to him. Women like her didn't speak to men like him. Men like him were dangerous, unpredictable, outside the rules that governed decent society. "I'm fine," Clara said automatically, even though she was very obviously not fine. She was sitting in the dirt covered in ink and tears, her ruined dress in her lap, her face surely blotched and swollen from crying. Caleb tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her want to squirm. "You don't look fine." "Well, I am. So you can just go away." She wanted him to go away. She wanted everyone to go away. She wanted to disappear into the ground and never have to face another human being again. But Caleb Rourke didn't move. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that Clara could see his face in the lamplight spilling from the church windows. His eyes were dark, sharp, missing nothing. "What happened to your dress?" he asked. Clara let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "It slipped. Apparently ink just slips right out of perfectly stable containers." "Uh-huh." Caleb crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, she could see scars. A thin line across his cheekbone, another through his eyebrow, stories written in damaged skin. "Who? Does it matter?" "Might." Clara looked away, unable to meet his gaze. There was something too direct about it, too seeing. Evelyn Carter, but like she said, it was an accident. Evelyn Carter. Caleb pronounced the name like he was tasting something rotten. "Blonde girl? Looks like butter wouldn't melt." Despite everything, Clara felt a tiny flicker of something that might have been amusement. That's her. She's a piece of work, that one. Watched her throw a fit at the general store last year because they didn't have the right color ribbon. Grown woman screaming at a shopkeeper over ribbon. Caleb shook his head. "What did you do to piss her off?" "I existed," Clara said bitterly. "I dared to exist in her world wearing a dress I made myself." Caleb was quiet for a moment, his eyes moving from her face to the ruined dress, to the ink staining her hands. Then he said something that surprised her. "You made this?" "Yes, 6 months of work, 6 months of hoping I could be—" Clara's voice cracked. "Doesn't matter now. It's destroyed. Let me see it." "What?" "The dress. Let me see it properly." Clara didn't understand what he was asking, but she was too exhausted to argue. She lifted the dress, holding it up so he could examine it. In the lamplight, the damage was even worse. Black ink spreading across yellow fabric like disease soaking through to the lining. Caleb reached out and touched the fabric, his rough hands surprisingly gentle. He examined a seam, then another. He looked at the hem, at the way she'd finished the neckline. "This is good work," he said finally. Clara blinked. "What?" "The construction, the stitching. This is quality work." He met her eyes. "You did this by yourself? No help?" Yes, I work at the boarding house. I sew in my spare time. Why was she telling him this? Why was he even asking? Caleb stood up abruptly. Stay here. Wait, what? But he was already walking away, disappearing around the side of the church with long, purposeful strides. Clara sat there, confused and alone again, wondering if she'd just hallucinated the entire interaction. The music from inside the church swelled. She could hear laughter, the sound of dancing feet. The party she'd dreamed of attending was happening without her, just like always. She was outside in the dirt where she belonged. She should go home. She was just starting to push herself to her feet when Caleb reappeared, moving fast. He had something in his arms, a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Come on, he said, jerking his head toward the street. We don't have much time. What? Time for what? You want to go to that dance or not? Clara stared at him. My dress is ruined, in case you didn't notice. So we'll make you a new one. She actually laughed at that, a harsh, broken sound. Right. We'll just make a dress in the next hour. Sure. Do you have any idea how long it takes to— I know someone, Caleb interrupted. Someone who can do things with fabric you wouldn't believe. But we need to move now before the dance gets too far along. He looked at her, and there was something fierce in his expression. You came here to be seen, didn't you? To stop being invisible? Well, I'm giving you a chance, but you've got to decide right now if you want to take it. Clara's heart was pounding. This was insane. He was insane. You didn't just make a dress in an hour. It wasn't possible. But then again, 6 months ago, she would have said it was impossible for her to attend this dance at all. Inside the church, someone laughed, high and bright and carefree. Evelyn's laugh, probably, celebrating her victory. Clara looked down at her ruined dress, at her ink-stained hands, at the dirt on her shoes. Then she looked at Caleb Rourke, this strange, intense man who had no reason to help her, but was standing there anyway, offering her something she didn't understand. Why? She asked. Why would you help me? Caleb's expression shifted, something complicated passing across his face. Because I've spent most of my life outside places I wasn't wanted. And because watching people like Evelyn Carter get away with being cruel makes me want to put my fist through something. That answer good enough? It shouldn't have been. It was barely an answer at all. But Clara found herself nodding. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Caleb's face broke into a grin, quick and fierce and transformative. Then let's go raise some hell. He turned and started walking, long strides eating up the street. Clara scrambled to her feet, clutching her ruined dress, and hurried after him. She had no idea where they were going, no idea what he was planning, no idea if this was another terrible mistake or the best decision of her life. But for the first time in hours, maybe years, she felt something other than resignation. She felt possibility. They moved through Red Hollow's streets as the last light drained from the sky. Caleb set a brutal pace, and Clara had to almost jog to keep up, her breath coming hard. He led her past the main street, past the familiar shops and houses, into a part of town she rarely visited. Where are we going? She gasped. Edge of town, near the creek. Red Hollow had an unofficial divide. The nice part, where Evelyn Carter and her family lived, where the church sat on its hill, occupied the northern section. The southern edge, near Willow Creek, was where people lived when they didn't quite fit the town's image of respectability. Immigrant families, native residents, people who worked with their hands and kept to themselves. Caleb finally stopped in front of a small cabin, set back from the main path. Smoke rose from the chimney, and lamplight glowed in the windows. Before Clara could ask any questions, Caleb knocked, 3 sharp raps. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 40s, with long black hair streaked with gray, and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She was native, Shoshone, Clara thought, though she'd never been properly introduced to any of the tribe members who lived near town. Caleb Rourke, the woman said, her voice carrying a note of amused exasperation. What trouble are you bringing to my door this time? Ayana, I need a favor. A big one. Ayana's eyes shifted to Clara, taking in her tear-stained face, her ink-ruined dress, the whole sorry picture. Her expression softened slightly. Come in, she said, stepping back. Both of you. The cabin's interior was warm, smelling of sage and something Clara couldn't identify. The walls were hung with beautiful textiles, some traditional native patterns, others more contemporary designs. A work table dominated one corner, covered with fabric and thread and tools. "This is Clara," Caleb said without preamble. "Someone destroyed the dress she made for the spring dance. I told her you could help." Ayanna raised an eyebrow. "Did you now? And what makes you think I want to spend my evening making dresses for—" She stopped, looking at Clara more closely. "Wait, you made that dress? The one covered in ink?" Clara nodded mutely. "Show me." With trembling hands, Clara held up the ruined garment. Ayanna took it, her fingers moving over the fabric with the same careful attention Caleb had shown. She examined seams, checked the tension of stitches, studied the construction. "You're self-taught," Ayanna said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." "Your tension is uneven in places. You compensate by double stitching, which works, but adds unnecessary weight." Ayanna looked up, and there was something like respect in her eyes. "But the overall construction is solid. You have an eye for proportion. Where did you learn?" I watched my mother, and I practiced. A lot." Ayanna handed the dress back and turned to Caleb. "What exactly are you asking for?" Caleb set down the oilcloth bundle he'd been carrying. When he unwrapped it, Clara gasped. Inside was white deerskin, not the usual tanned brown, but a rare, pure white. Even in the lamplight, it seemed to glow. "I've been saving this," Caleb said quietly. "Had it for 3 years. Was waiting for the right purpose." He looked at Clara, then back to Ayanna. "I think this is it." Ayanna stared at the deerskin like she was seeing a ghost. "Caleb, do you have any idea how rare—" "Yeah, I know. This could buy you a horse, maybe 2. Don't want horses, want to see this girl walk into that dance and make those cruel bitches choke on their champagne." Despite everything, Clara felt a surprised laugh bubble up. Ayanna's lips twitched. "Well," Ayanna said, "when you put it that way—" She looked at Clara. "Take off your outer dress. I need to see your proportions." The next hour was a blur. Ayanna moved like a woman possessed, her hands flying over the white deerskin with absolute confidence. She cut without patterns, eyeballing measurements and trusting her instincts. Caleb disappeared and returned with additional materials: soft leather cord, glass beads, strips of colored fabric. Clara stood in her chemise and petticoat, feeling exposed and strange as Ayanna draped fabric over her, pinned it, cut it, and somehow, impossibly, began constructing a dress in real time. "This won't be fancy like those town girls wear," Ayanna said, her mouth full of pins. "It'll be different. Better, if you ask me, but different. You okay with that?" Clara thought about Evelyn's emerald silk, about all those carefully constructed gowns designed to signal wealth and status and belonging. "I'm okay with different," she said. Ayanna smiled. "Good answer." The dress took shape like magic. The white deerskin formed the base, soft as butter, fitting Clara's curves without trying to hide them. Ayanna added panels in deep red and black, geometric patterns that echoed traditional designs but felt fresh, modern. She incorporated beadwork along the neckline and hem, not busy or overwhelming, just enough to catch the light. Caleb contributed by figuring out structural problems Clara didn't even know existed. He understood how movement worked, how weight distributed, how to make something both beautiful and functional. At one point, he disappeared again and came back with thin strips of silver birch bark, which Ayanna somehow incorporated into the design. "You're going to make them question everything they think they know about fashion," Ayanna said, stepping back to assess her work. "This isn't about copying what they value. It's about showing them something they've never seen before." With 20 minutes until the dance's midpoint, they finished. Ayanna helped Clara into the completed dress and then guided her to the mirror. A good mirror, not the cracked thing Clara had at home. The woman looking back was a stranger. The white deerskin caught the lamplight, making Clara seem to glow. The cut was unlike anything worn by the town's women. It acknowledged her body instead of fighting it, creating lines that looked powerful rather than apologetic. The red and black accents gave it drama, and the beadwork added subtle movement with every breath. She looked She looked like someone who mattered. "Oh," Clara whispered. "Yeah," Caleb said from behind her. His voice was rough. "Oh." Ayana was smiling, fierce and proud. "Now, listen to me, girl. When you walk in there, you don't apologize. You don't shrink. You walk in like you own every floorboard. Understand?" Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "And if anyone asks where you got this dress, you tell them the truth. You tell them it was made by Ayana Hollow Creek, with materials provided by Caleb Rourke for a woman named Clara Whitmore, who deserved better than she got. You tell them exactly that." "I will," Clara managed. Caleb offered his arm. "Ready to crash a party?" Clara looked at herself one more time. At this version of herself she'd never imagined could exist. Then she took Caleb's arm. "Let's go." The walk back to the church felt different. Clara was aware of people noticing them. A mountain man and a woman in an extraordinary dress, walking through the evening streets like they had every right to exist. Some folks stared, some whispered. Clara kept her head up. They could hear the music from a block away. The dance was in full swing now, the church alive with light and sound and celebration. Clara's stomach churned with nerves, but underneath the fear was something else, something fiercer. At the church entrance, Caleb stopped. "I can't go in there with you, not really my scene, but you don't need me anyway." He looked at her seriously. "You've got this." "What if?" "No what ifs. You walk in there, you show them what you're made of. And remember, that dress ain't what makes you worth seeing. You were always worth seeing. The dress just makes sure they can't look away." Clara's eyes burned with tears, but these were different from the ones she'd cried earlier. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know why you helped me, but thank you." Caleb's expression softened. "Maybe I'm just tired of watching the wrong people win." He squeezed her hand once, brief and warm. "Now go, and enjoy the hell out of their faces when you walk in." He stepped back, melting into the shadows. Clara stood alone at the church entrance, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Inside, the music played. Inside, Evelyn Carter was probably holding court, secure in her victory. Inside, Clara's humiliation was likely still the hot gossip of the evening. She could still leave. She could still go home and forget this whole night. But she'd spent 22 years being invisible, 22 years apologizing for existing. Clara Whitmore pushed open the church doors and stepped inside. The music didn't stop, not immediately. The dancers kept turning, the conversations kept flowing. But a ripple went through the room, person by person turning to look, the awareness spreading like wildfire. Clara walked forward, her head high, the white deerskin dress catching every light source in the room. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She walked like Ayana had told her to, like she owned every floorboard. The music faltered, then stopped entirely. Now everyone was staring. Clara's eyes found Evelyn Carter across the room, and she watched the other woman's face go through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, shock, and finally something that might have been fear. In that moment, everything changed. Because Clara Whitmore had just learned that the most powerful thing a woman can do is refuse to disappear, no matter how hard the world tries to erase her. And this was only the beginning. The silence stretched like pulled taffy, sticky and uncomfortable. Clara kept walking, her boots clicking against the wood floor, each step deliberate. She could feel every eye in the room tracking her movement, could practically hear the thoughts racing through their heads as they tried to reconcile what they were seeing with what they thought they knew about Clara Whitmore. The church hall had been transformed for the dance. Paper lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm pools of light. Tables lined the walls, laden with punch bowls and cookies and small sandwiches. The musicians, 3 men with a violin, piano, and guitar, stood frozen on their platform mid-song. Clara stopped in the center of the room. She didn't know what she was supposed to do next. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, but in her fantasies she'd always had a plan beyond just showing up. Now she was here, the entire town staring at her, and her mind went blank. "Well," a voice broke the silence. Mayor Harrison, a portly man with magnificent whiskers, stepped forward with the careful diplomacy of someone navigating a social minefield. "Miss Whitmore, what in—" Unexpected pleasure. We weren't sure you'd be joining us this evening. Translation. We heard about your humiliation and assumed you'd crawl home where you belong. Clara's throat was dry. I wouldn't miss it, Mayor Harrison. That's quite a dress, his wife added, her tone impossible to read. Mrs. Harrison was one of those women who'd perfected the art of the neutral compliment, words that could mean anything depending on who was listening. Thank you. It was made by Ayana Hollow Creek. The name rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Ayana was known, of course. Everyone in Red Hollow knew everyone else, at least by reputation. But the divide between the town proper and the creek settlement was rarely crossed, and never for something like this. How interesting, Mrs. Harrison said, and there was a slight frost in her voice now. Before Clara could respond, another voice cut through the tension. I think it's absolutely stunning. Clara turned to see Sarah Chen stepping forward from the crowd. Sarah was the daughter of the family that ran the general store, one of the few Chinese families in Red Hollow. She existed in a strange social space, necessary to the town's economy, but never quite accepted into its heart. Her smile was warm and genuine. The beadwork alone must have taken hours, Sarah continued, moving closer to examine the dress. And this white deerskin, I've never seen anything like it. Where did it come from? Caleb Rourke provided the materials, Clara said, her voice gaining strength. If she was going to do this, she might as well do it properly. He's been saving it for years. More ripples. More whispers. Caleb Rourke's name carried its own weight, respect mixed with wariness, the kind of reputation built on being too competent to dismiss, but too wild to embrace. Caleb Rourke helped you? This from Margaret Sullivan, disbelief dripping from every word. She stood next to Evelyn, who still hadn't moved or spoken, her face pale. He did more than help, Clara said, and she was surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. He saw what happened to my other dress. He decided to do something about it. The room went very still. Clara hadn't named Evelyn, hadn't directly accused anyone, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn finally found her voice. I already explained that was an accident. The inkwell slipped. Did it? Clara met her eyes. How clumsy you must have felt. It was a nothing statement, neutral as Switzerland, but something in Clara's tone made it land like an accusation. Evelyn's cheeks flushed red. I don't appreciate what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Clara interrupted, and she felt a rush of something fierce and unfamiliar. Power, maybe. Or just the simple freedom of having nothing left to lose. I'm just stating facts. My dress was ruined. Caleb and Ayana helped me make a new one. And now I'm here. Ladies, Mayor Harrison interjected, his voice carrying the forced joviality of someone desperate to avoid a scene. Perhaps we could... I'd like to dance, Clara said suddenly. The words came out before she'd fully thought them through, but once they were out, she committed. She looked around the room, at all the men studiously avoiding eye contact. Anyone? The silence was excruciating. Clara's brief surge of confidence wavered. This was it. The moment where her audacity would be rejected, where she'd be put back in her place through the simple act of being ignored. Then Thomas Webb stepped forward. Thomas was the railroad superintendent's son, maybe 25, tall and sandy-haired and generally considered one of Red Hollow's most eligible bachelors. Clara had exchanged maybe 10 words with him in her entire life. I'll dance with you, Miss Whitmore, he said. The collective gasp was almost audible. Thomas's mother looked like she might faint, but Thomas was already extending his hand, his expression pleasant and unreadable. Clara took it. The musicians, bless them, understood their cue. The violin picked up a waltz, gentle and flowing, and suddenly Clara was being guided onto the dance floor by Thomas Webb, while the entire town watched. Thank you, Clara whispered as they began to move. Don't thank me yet, Thomas murmured back. I'm a terrible dancer. Step on your feet at least twice, guaranteed. Despite everything, Clara felt a smile tug at her lips. I'll try to survive. They turned, and Clara caught a glimpse of Evelyn's face, shock giving way to something uglier, something closer to fury. Margaret had her hand on Evelyn's arm, holding her back from something. Good. Can I ask you something? Thomas said as they navigated the floor. You just did. He smiled. Fair point. Can I ask you something else? Depends on the question. What made you come back? Well, after earlier. Most people would have stayed home. Clara considered lying, offering some polite deflection, but she was tired of performing the version of herself that other people expected. I got tired of disappearing, she said, tired of making myself smaller so other people could feel bigger. And I had help from two people who barely know me but decided I was worth defending anyway. She met his eyes. That kind of thing changes your perspective. Thomas nodded slowly. Caleb Rourke, huh? Didn't figure him for the charitable type. I don't think it was charity. I think he was just mad at the right people for the right reasons. Well, Thomas said as the song wound down, whatever his reasons, the result is impressive. You look... He paused, seeming to search for the right word. You look like yourself. But more so, if that makes sense. It made perfect sense. Clara felt like herself, not trying to copy Evelyn's polish or Sarah's grace or anyone else's version of acceptable femininity. Just Clara, but Clara as she could be when she wasn't apologizing for existing. The waltz ended. Thomas bowed, Clara curtsied, and for a moment she thought that might be it. One dance, one small victory, and then back to being ignored. Instead, Daniel Martinez approached. May I have the next dance? Then James Wong, then Robert O'Connor, then a steady stream of partners, some motivated by genuine interest, others by curiosity or the social pressure of everyone else participating. Clara danced until her feet ached, until her cheeks hurt from smiling, until the initial shock of her entrance faded into something almost normal. Almost. Because between songs she could feel Evelyn's eyes on her, could sense the tight knot of wealthy daughters clustered in the corner, whispering furiously among themselves. The dance might be accepting her presence, but the war wasn't over. During a break in the music, Clara made her way to the refreshment table. Her throat was parched, and she needed a moment to catch her breath. She was pouring herself some punch when a voice spoke beside her. Quite the entrance you made. Clara turned to find an older woman she didn't recognize, maybe 40, expensively dressed, with the kind of polished confidence that came from money and position. Her accent carried traces of Boston or New York, somewhere east and urban. Thank you, Clara said carefully. I think, the woman smiled. Victoria Ashford. My husband and I are passing through on business. We're staying at the hotel for a few weeks while he finalizes some contracts with the railroad. She gestured to a distinguished-looking man across the room, deep in conversation with the mayor. I convinced him to attend tonight. Small-town socials can be quite entertaining. There was something in her tone that made Clara uncertain whether she was being complimented or mocked. That's a remarkable dress, Victoria continued, her eyes traveling over Clara's outfit with the assessing gaze of someone who understood fashion. I've seen the latest from Paris and New York, but nothing quite like this. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. Who did you say made it? Ayana Hollow Creek. She lives just outside town. And she does this professionally? I'm not sure. I think she sews for people in her community, but I don't know if she takes outside commissions. Victoria's eyes sharpened with interest. How fascinating. I'd very much like to meet her. Before Clara could respond, Evelyn materialized at her other elbow. Her face was composed now, the earlier shock replaced with a kind of icy politeness that was somehow more threatening. Clara, she said, her voice honey-sweet. I wanted to apologize again for the unfortunate incident earlier. I felt simply terrible about it. I'm sure you did, Clara said evenly. It's just so impressive that you managed to put together a replacement so quickly. Evelyn's eyes traveled over the dress, and there was something calculating in her expression. Although I have to say it's quite unusual. Not really what one typically wears to an event like this, is it? I think it's spectacular, Victoria interjected before Clara could respond. Utterly unique. In fact, I was just telling Miss Whitmore that I'd like to commission something similar. Evelyn's smile froze. You... what? A dress. Or perhaps several. I'm always looking for distinctive pieces, and this is certainly that. Victoria looked at Clara. Would Miss Hollow Creek be interested in such a commission, do you think? Clara's mind raced. She had no idea what Ayana would say to such an offer, but the expression on Evelyn's face made her want to say yes, just on principle. I can ask her, Clara said. I'm sure she'd at least be willing to discuss it. Wonderful. Perhaps you could bring her by the hotel tomorrow, say 2 o'clock? I'll see if she's available. Victoria smiled and drifted away, leaving Clara alone with Evelyn. The other girl's pleasant mask had cracked, revealing the fury underneath. You think you're very clever, don't you? Evelyn hissed, her voice low enough that nearby dancers couldn't hear. I think I'm trying to enjoy an evening that someone tried very hard to ruin for me, Clara replied. This isn't over. You don't belong here, Clara. You never have. One dress doesn't change that. Maybe not, but it seems to have changed what people are willing to see. Evelyn's eyes flashed. You're making a mistake. People like you don't get to just… Miss Carter. Both women turned. Caleb Rourke stood in the doorway, still not quite inside the church proper, but no longer outside either. He looked profoundly uncomfortable in the social setting, but his eyes were locked on Evelyn with an intensity that made her step back. I believe you dropped this earlier, Caleb said, his voice carrying across the room. He held up a handkerchief, delicate white linen with embroidered initials. EC. Evelyn's hand flew to her reticule, then to her pocket. That's… Where did you… Found it in the basement dressing room, near the writing desk, right where the ink spilled. Caleb's expression was flat, unreadable. Thought you might want it back. Looks expensive. The implication was clear. He'd been in the dressing room. He'd seen something or knew something about what had really happened. Whether it was true or a bluff didn't matter. The threat was implicit. Evelyn's face went white, then red. She snatched the handkerchief from Caleb's hand. Thank you, she said through gritted teeth. Don't mention it. Caleb's eyes shifted to Clara, and something in his expression softened slightly. Evening, Miss Whitmore. Looks like things are going better than earlier. Much better, thanks to you. And Miss Hollow Creek, woman's a miracle worker. He nodded once, then retreated back outside, his duty apparently done. The music started up again, something faster, more energetic. Clara found herself swept back onto the dance floor, but she kept an eye on Evelyn, watching as the other girl retreated to her corner of friends, her confidence visibly shaken. The evening wore on. Clara danced until her feet were definitely blistered, accepted more compliments on her dress than she'd received in her entire life, and fielded questions about Ayana and Caleb and how she'd managed to put together such a stunning outfit in under an hour. She answered honestly, giving credit where it was due, watching as curiosity about the dress transformed into genuine interest in its creators. Around 10 o'clock, as the party began to wind down, Sarah Chen found her near the coat room. Clara, can I talk to you for a minute? They stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars were brilliant overhead, unfettered by city lights. Clara could hear the distant sound of Willow Creek, smell the sage and pine that characterized this high desert country. I just wanted to say, Sarah began, then paused, seeming to struggle for words. What you did tonight. Coming back after what happened. It mattered. Clara blinked. I don't understand. Yes, you do. Sarah's expression was serious. You know what it's like. Being on the outside. Being tolerated, but not welcomed. Having people smile to your face while they whisper behind their hands. She looked back at the church where light and music still spilled from the windows. Evelyn and her friends have been running this town's social life for years. They decide who's in and who's out, who matters and who doesn't, and nobody challenges them because it's easier not to. I didn't exactly challenge them, Clara said. I just showed up in a dress. You showed up after they tried to break you. That's different. Sarah smiled. And watching Mrs. Ashford, an actual society woman from back east, get interested in your dress instead of Evelyn's imported silk, that was beautiful. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. I didn't plan any of that. Doesn't matter. It happened. And now other people are thinking maybe the Carter girls don't have all the answers. Sarah squeezed her hand. Just be careful. Evelyn doesn't lose gracefully. I'm getting that impression. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, then Sarah headed back inside. Clara lingered, looking up at the stars, trying to process everything that had happened. This morning, she'd been invisible. Now she was… what? Still not accepted. Not really. But visible. Undeniably, unavoidably visible. Hell of a night. Clara smiled without turning around. She'd recognize that rough voice anywhere now. You came back. Caleb emerged from the shadows, a talent he seemed to have perfected. Wanted to make sure you didn't need rescuing again. I think I managed. Yeah, you did. He leaned against the church wall, studying her in the starlight. That Ashford woman, serious about commissioning work? I think so. She wants to meet with Ayanna tomorrow. Caleb let out a low whistle. That could be something. Woman like that, with money and connections. If she likes what she sees, could mean real business. Do you think Ayanna would be interested? Don't know. She's never been much for dealing with townfolk, prefers to keep to her own community. He was quiet for a moment. But she also appreciates skill recognizing skill. And she liked you. She doesn't even know me. She knows you worked 6 months on a dress because you had a dream. She knows you got knocked down and got back up. That's enough for Ayanna. Caleb pushed off from the wall. You should go ask her yourself tomorrow morning before that meeting. Give her the option. Let her decide. Would you come with me? The question surprised them both. Caleb's eyebrows rose. Why? Because you're part of this. The dress, the whole thing. And because I don't know Ayanna, and you do, and I don't want to mess this up by saying the wrong thing. Caleb considered this. All right, I'll meet you at the boarding house at 9. We'll walk over together. Thank you. Again. I keep thanking you. Yeah, well, Caleb looked uncomfortable. Maybe stop doing that. Makes me feel weird. Clara laughed. An actual, genuine laugh. It felt good. Fine. No more thanking you. Appreciate it. He started to walk away, then stopped. Clara? Yes? Did good tonight. Real good. Don't let anyone tell you different. Then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness like he'd never been there at all. Clara stayed outside a while longer, committing the night to memory. The cool air, the distant music, the feeling of having survived something that should have destroyed her. Eventually, she went back inside to collect her ruined yellow dress from where she'd left it in the dressing room. No point wasting the fabric, she could salvage some of it. And said her goodbyes. The walk home took her through quiet streets, past darkened shops and sleeping houses. She was exhausted, her feet aching, her mind buzzing with everything that had happened. But underneath the fatigue was something else. Something that felt like hope, but sharper, more dangerous. The boarding house was dark when she arrived. She let herself in quietly, not wanting to wake the guests. Her room was tiny, barely big enough for a bed and a chair, but it was hers. She carefully removed the white deerskin dress, hanging it with the kind of reverence usually reserved for holy relics. Maggie was waiting for her, sitting on Clara's bed in her nightgown. Well, her sister demanded, tell me everything. Clara sat down beside her and did. She talked until her voice was hoarse, describing the entrance, the dancing, Evelyn's fury, Victoria Ashford's interest. Maggie listened with wide eyes, interrupting occasionally with gasps or questions. You danced with Thomas Webb? Maggie practically squealed. Clara, he's… I know who he is. And Mrs. Ashford wants to buy dresses from Ayanna? Maybe, if Ayanna agrees. Maggie was quiet for a moment, her young face serious. Are you scared? Terrified, Clara admitted. This could all fall apart tomorrow. Evelyn's not going to just accept what happened. And I have no idea if Ayanna will actually want to work with Mrs. Ashford, or if this whole thing will just turn into another humiliation. But you're going to try anyway. Yeah, I'm going to try anyway. Maggie hugged her, fierce and quick. I'm proud of you. Clara's eyes burned. Get to bed, Mags. It's late. After her sister left, Clara lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tomorrow she'd have to face the consequences of tonight's defiance. Tomorrow might prove that this was all just a temporary aberration, a single night of magic before reality reasserted itself. But tonight, she'd walked into that church and made them see her. Tonight, she'd danced. Tonight, she'd been visible. And that was enough to build on. Morning came too soon. Clara woke to gray light filtering through her small window and the sound of the boarding house coming to life. Guests calling for breakfast, her mother's footsteps in the kitchen below, the general chaos of running a business that never really slept. She dressed carefully in her everyday clothes. Simple brown skirt, white blouse, work apron. The white deerskin dress hung on its hook, looking almost ethereal in the morning light. Real. It had been real. Downstairs, the breakfast rush was in full swing. Clara grabbed a biscuit and some coffee, helping her mother serve the guests between bites. The railroad men were arguing about equipment. The traveling salesman was reading a newspaper, the usual morning routine. Except it wasn't usual at all, because when Clara brought fresh coffee to the corner table, she found Thomas Webb sitting there. "Miss Whitmore," he said, standing politely. "I was hoping to catch you." Clara's mother raised an eyebrow but said nothing, retreating to give them space. "Mr. Webb, what brings you to the boarding house?" "I wanted to ask if you'd accompany me to the church social next month." He said it quickly, like he'd been rehearsing. "As my guest." Clara blinked. "You want to what?" "Take you to the social, if you're interested. If not, I completely understand. I just thought Yes?" Clara interrupted. "Yes, I'll go." Thomas's face broke into a genuine smile. "Excellent. That's excellent." He seemed surprised that she'd agreed. "I'll call on you the week before to confirm the details?" "That would be fine." After he left, Clara's mother cornered her in the kitchen. "Thomas Webb?" "I'm as surprised as you are, Mama." Her mother studied her face. "Something changed. Something big." "I went to the dance last night." "I know. Maggie told me. She also told me about the dress, and Caleb Rourke, and the whole business with Evelyn Carter." Her mother's expression softened. "I should have asked about it last night. Should have made sure you were all right." "I'm fine. Better than fine." "Are you?" Her mother took her hands. "Clara, honey, these people, they don't change their minds easily. What happened last night might not mean what you think it means." "I know, but it means something, and right now that's enough." At 9 o'clock, Caleb appeared at the boarding house door, looking only slightly less uncomfortable than he had at the church. Clara grabbed her shawl and met him outside. They walked to Ayanna's cabin mostly in silence. Caleb wasn't much for small talk, and Clara was too nervous to attempt it. When they arrived, Ayanna was outside working on a loom, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Morning," Caleb called. Ayanna looked up, unsurprised. "I was wondering when you'd show up. Come inside. I'll make coffee." Over strong, bitter coffee, Clara explained about Victoria Ashford and her interest in commissioning work. Ayanna listened without interrupting, her expression impossible to read. When Clara finished, Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. "This woman," she said finally. "She has money?" "Seems like it. Her husband's involved with the railroad. And she wants to pay me to make dresses for her." "I think so." She seemed genuinely interested. Ayanna stood, pacing to the window. Outside, Willow Creek burbled past, indifferent to human concerns. "You know what'll happen if I say yes," Ayanna said, not looking at them. "Town folks who've ignored me for 20 years will suddenly want my work. They'll want the exotic, the different, but safe, controlled, on their terms." "Maybe," Caleb said, "or maybe it's a chance to show them what you can actually do. Let your work speak for itself." "You think it's that simple?" "No, but nothing ever is." He leaned back in his chair. "You've been making beautiful things for people who appreciate them but can't pay much. Here's someone who can pay, who can spread word to others who can pay. Could mean real money, Ayanna, security. Could mean selling out. Could mean surviving." The two of them stared at each other, some long-running argument playing out in shorthand. Finally, Ayanna turned to Clara. "What do you think?" Clara startled. "Me? You? You're the one in the middle of this. What do you think I should do?" Clara chose her words carefully. "I think you should meet her, see what she wants, and then decide if it's something you want to make. You don't owe her anything. You don't owe me anything. But," she paused, "but I think your work deserves to be seen by everyone, not just the people who already understand its value." Ayanna smiled slightly. "Diplomatic answer?" "Honest answer." All right, I'll meet with her. 2 o'clock, you said? At the hotel. I'll be there. Ayana looked at Caleb. You coming too? Hell no. This is business between you two. I'm just the guy who provided some leather. Coward. Absolutely. But when 2 o'clock came, Caleb was there anyway, waiting outside the hotel with Clara. Ayana arrived exactly on time, dressed in a beautiful mix of traditional and contemporary clothing that somehow looked both casual and elegant. Thought you weren't coming, Ayana said to Caleb. Changed my mind. Figure somebody should be here to make sure these fancy people don't try to cheat you. I can handle myself. Never said you couldn't. Victoria Ashford received them in the hotel's small parlor, a space usually reserved for wealthy guests. Her husband was absent, leaving just the four of them. Victoria's eyes lit up when she saw Ayana. Miss Hollow Creek, thank you for coming. Please sit. What followed was a negotiation unlike anything Clara had witnessed. Victoria explained that she wanted 3 dresses, 1 for herself, 2 for her daughters back east. She wanted them distinctive, incorporating native techniques and designs, but suitable for high society events. I'm not making costumes, Ayana said bluntly. I'm not creating something for wealthy white women to wear when they want to feel adventurous. Victoria didn't flinch. I'm not asking you to. I want art. I want clothing that honors its origins while being functional for the life I lead. Can you do that? Maybe. Depends on whether you're willing to trust me. What do you mean? I mean I won't show you sketches for approval. I won't make samples for you to critique. You tell me about yourself, about your daughters, about the occasions you need these dresses for. Then I make what I think is right. You either take them or you don't. But I won't change my work because you think it should have more ruffles or different colors. Clara held her breath. This was a power play, a test. Victoria could walk away right now, find someone more accommodating. Instead, Victoria laughed. Fair enough. How much? Ayana named a price that made Clara's eyes widen. It was more than she made in 6 months at the boarding house. Victoria didn't even blink. Half now, half on delivery? Acceptable. They shook hands, and just like that, Ayana Hollow Creek was in business with high society. As they left the hotel, Caleb shook his head. You're crazy, woman. What if she hates what you make? Then she doesn't pay me the second half, and I keep 3 beautiful dresses. Ayana's eyes were bright. But she won't hate them. I'm too good at what I do. Clara found herself grinning. What happens now? Now, Ayana said, I work. And you, Clara Whitmore, are going to help me. I'll need someone to assist with the simpler construction while I focus on the detail work. Interested? Yes. Yes, absolutely. Good. Come by tomorrow evening. We'll start planning. As they walked back through town, Clara felt the shift. People noticed them, noticed the 3 of them together, this unlikely alliance. Some looked curious, others disapproving. But they all looked. That night, lying in bed, Clara thought about how quickly everything had changed. 24 hours ago, she'd been crying in the dirt, her dreams literally destroyed. Now she had a date to the next social, a chance to learn from a master craftswoman, and a growing sense that maybe, just maybe, she'd stumbled into something bigger than one ruined dress. But Sarah's warning echoed in her mind. Evelyn doesn't lose gracefully. Whatever came next, Clara knew it wouldn't be easy. But she also knew she wasn't facing it alone anymore, and that made all the difference. The work started the next evening, just as Ayana had promised. Clara arrived at the cabin near Willow Creek carrying her sewing kit and a nervous energy that made her hands shake slightly as she knocked on the door. She'd spent the entire day at the boarding house replaying the conversation with Victoria Ashford, half convinced she'd imagined the whole thing. Ayana opened the door with a length of deep blue fabric draped over one shoulder and pins stuck between her lips. She gestured Clara inside without speaking, then removed the pins and pointed to the work table. Can you do a flat-felled seam? Ayana asked. Yes. Show me. Clara spent the next 20 minutes demonstrating her skills while Ayana watched with the critical eye of someone who'd forgotten more about sewing than most people ever learned. Finally, Ayana nodded. You'll do. Your tension still needs work, but you understand structure. That's harder to teach. She pulled out a sketch, rough but clear. Mrs. Ashford told me about her daughters. Lillian is 23, engaged to a banker's son in Philadelphia. Emma is 19, just had her coming out. Both of them live in a world where appearances matter more than comfort. That must be difficult, Clara said. Ayanna's mouth quirked. Different kind of difficult than what we face. Not better or worse. Just different. She spread out several fabric samples. I'm thinking silk base for both of them, but incorporated with our techniques. Beadwork that looks decorative but tells a story. You know the language of beads? Clara shook her head. Then I'll teach you. Every pattern means something. Colors, placement, everything speaks. Ayanna selected a rich burgundy silk. This is for Lillian, engaged woman, stepping into a new life. The beadwork will incorporate symbols of transition, of bridges between worlds. They worked until Clara's eyes burned from the lamplight and her fingers ached. Ayanna was a demanding teacher, accepting nothing less than precision, but she was also patient in her own brusque way. When Clara made a mistake, Ayanna showed her once how to fix it, then expected her to remember. You learn fast, Ayanna said around midnight as Clara carefully pinned a hem. That's good. We have 6 weeks to complete 3 dresses that would normally take 3 months. Can we do it? We'll have to. I already spent half the money. Clara's head snapped up. You what? Ayanna smiled slightly. Bought materials, paid off some debts, gave my sister enough to fix her roof. She met Clara's shocked expression. What? You think I should have saved it all? Money's no good if you're too scared to use it. But what if we fail? Then we fail. I'll make it right somehow. Ayanna's expression sobered. Listen to me, Clara. I've watched too many people spend their whole lives preparing for a future that never comes, building up reserves against disasters that might not happen while real opportunities pass them by. That's no way to live. That's easy to say when you're not the one who'll lose everything if it goes wrong. Who says I won't lose everything? Ayanna set down her needle. I took a big gamble today, agreed to work with town people, which half my community thinks is selling out. Spent money I don't technically have yet. Pulled you into this when you could get hurt if it falls apart. You think I'm not scared? Clara studied the older woman's face, seeing the tension around her eyes, the tight set of her shoulders. You don't look scared. That's because I'm good at pretending, years of practice. Ayanna picked up her needle again. But fear doesn't mean stop. Fear just means pay attention. They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the whisper of thread through fabric and the distant murmur of the creek outside. Clara found herself thinking about the past few days, about how quickly her entire life had shifted. A week ago, her biggest concern had been finishing that yellow dress. Now she was learning beadwork from a master craftswoman and helping create garments for Philadelphia society. Can I ask you something? Clara said finally. You just did. Clara smiled despite herself. Can I ask you something else? Depends on the question. Why did you agree to help me that first night when Caleb brought me here? You didn't know me. You had no reason to spend your evening making a dress for a stranger. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, her hands never stopping their steady work. You want the truth or the polite answer? The truth. Caleb Rourke has never asked me for a favor, not in 15 years of knowing him. So when he showed up at my door with you and that white deerskin he'd been hoarding like dragon gold, I figured it must be important. She glanced up. And then I looked at your face and saw something I recognized. What? Someone who'd been trying so hard to be small that they'd almost disappeared entirely. Someone who was tired of it but didn't know how to stop. Ayanna's expression was unreadable. I've been that person. Most of us have, one way or another. So yeah, I helped. Not just for Caleb, for you. And maybe a little bit for the girl I used to be. Clara's throat felt tight. Thank you. Stop thanking people and finish that hem. They worked until 2 in the morning. By the time Clara stumbled back to the boarding house, her fingers were cramping and her mind was swimming with new techniques and possibilities. She fell into bed still fully dressed and dreamed of beadwork patterns that told stories in languages she didn't speak. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm, days at the boarding house, evenings at Ayanna's cabin. Clara learned fast, driven by necessity and genuine fascination. The beadwork language revealed itself slowly, how certain colors represented seasons, how patterns could indicate family lines or significant events, how the space between beads mattered as much as the beads themselves. Caleb showed up occasionally, usually with materials Ayanna had requested: rare feathers, specific types of sinew, leather worked to particular specifications. He'd stay for an hour or two, working on structural elements that required strength Clara and Ayanna lacked, then disappear back into the hills. "Where does he go?" Clara asked one evening after Caleb had left. "Wherever he wants. Caleb's not much for staying put." Ayanna threaded a needle with practiced ease. "He's got a cabin up in the high country, traps in winter, hunts in summer, trades his goods when he needs supplies. It's a hard life, but it's his." "He seems lonely." "Maybe. Or maybe he just prefers his own company to most people's." Ayanna glanced at Clara. "Not everyone wants what you want. Some folks are built for solitude." But Clara noticed that Caleb's visits increased in frequency as the project progressed. He'd bring coffee or food, claim he was just passing through, then end up staying half the night while they worked. He and Ayanna had an easy rapport, finishing each other's sentences, communicating in shorthand built over years of friendship. "You two ever—" Clara started once, then stopped, embarrassed. Ayanna laughed. "No, he's like a brother, an annoying, overly protective brother who thinks I can't handle myself." She raised her voice slightly. "Which I can, thank you very much." From across the room, Caleb snorted. "Sure you can. That's why I had to save your hide from that bear 3 years back. I had that situation under control. You were up a tree screaming for help. I was strategically repositioning." Their bickering continued, comfortable and familiar, and Clara felt a pang of something like envy. Not for romantic connection, but for that ease of friendship, that certainty of belonging somewhere. The dresses took shape slowly. Lillian's burgundy silk with gold and cream beadwork that formed subtle patterns of bridges and doorways. Emma's pale green with silver accents, incorporating symbols of growth and new beginnings. And Victoria's, deep midnight blue with white and pale blue beadwork that somehow suggested stars without being obvious about it. Clara's role evolved from simple construction to more complex work. Ayanna taught her how to incorporate beads into seams so they appeared to float on the fabric, how to balance weight so elaborate decoration didn't drag the garment down, how to think about movement, about how fabric would flow and shift on a living body. "You're good at this," Ayanna said one night, examining a section Clara had completed. "Really good. You have instincts that can't be taught." "My mother used to say I had steady hands." "It's more than that. You understand how things fit together, how to solve problems before they happen." Ayanna set down the fabric. "Have you thought about what you want to do? After this project, I mean." Clara blinked. "I work at the boarding house." "That's what you do to survive. I'm asking what you want to do." "I don't know. I never really thought I had options." Ayanna's expression was serious. "You have options now. Mrs. Ashford's going to love these dresses. I can feel it. When she does, there'll be more work, more opportunities. You could keep assisting me, or you could start taking your own commissions, or both." The idea was dizzying. Clara had spent so long just trying to get through each day that the concept of actually choosing a future felt foreign. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Clara admitted. "Nobody's ever ready. You just do it anyway and figure it out as you go." But the real test came not from their work, but from Red Hollow itself. 3 weeks into the project, Clara was leaving Ayanna's cabin late one evening when she found Evelyn Carter waiting on the path. Not alone. She had Margaret Sullivan and 2 other girls from her circle, all of them dressed too nicely for a casual evening stroll. Clara's stomach dropped, but she kept walking. "Excuse me." Evelyn stepped into her path. "We need to talk." "I don't think we do." "You're making a mistake, Clara. Getting involved with these people." Evelyn's voice was sugar-sweet, but her eyes were hard. "People are talking, saying things about you. Let them talk. Is that really what you want? To be known as the girl who abandoned her own kind to work with—" Evelyn paused delicately. "With outsiders?" Clara felt anger flare hot in her chest. "My own kind? You mean the people who destroyed my dress and mocked me? Those people?" "That was an accident. I've apologized." No, you performed an apology because people were watching. There's a difference. Margaret stepped forward. You're being incredibly rude, Clara. Evelyn is trying to help you. By warning me away from the only people who've actually been kind to me? Some help. They're using you, Evelyn said, and there was something almost like genuine concern in her voice. Almost. That Indian woman and Caleb Rourke, they're using you to get access to better clientele. Don't you see that? You're just a tool to them. And what was I to you? Clara asked quietly. A punchline? An object lesson in why girls like me should know our place? Evelyn's mask cracked slightly. You don't belong in our world, Clara. You never did. This whole thing, the dress, the attention, it's just a novelty. People will get bored. And when they do, you'll be left with nothing except a reputation for getting above yourself. Maybe. Or maybe I'll have skills and friends and a future I actually chose. Clara stepped around Evelyn, her heart pounding. Either way, it'll be mine. Not something handed down by people who think cruelty is a birthright. You'll regret this, Evelyn called after her. Clara didn't turn around. She kept walking, her hands shaking but her step steady. She didn't feel victorious. She felt sick and scared and uncertain. But she also felt something else, something that might have been pride. When she got home, her mother was waiting up. Evelyn Carter came by earlier, her mother said without preamble. She wanted to talk to me about you, about the company you're keeping. Clara sank into a chair. What did she say? That you were being led astray by disreputable people, that I should intervene before you damaged your reputation beyond repair. Her mother's expression was unreadable. She was very concerned, very polite about it. Are you going to forbid me from going to Ayana's? Are you asking permission or informing me of your decision? Clara met her mother's eyes. I'm 22. I work. I pay my share of expenses. I help run this house. I'm not asking permission. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Your father used to say that reputation is what other people think of you, but character is what you do when nobody's watching. I think he was right about that. Mama, I'm not finished. Evelyn Carter has a reputation for being a fine, upstanding young woman. But her character? Her mother shook her head. I've seen how she treats the help, how she talks about people she thinks are beneath her. Reputation doesn't mean much if the character underneath is rotten. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. So you don't want me to stop? I want you to be careful. People like Evelyn don't forget slights, real or perceived. But no, I don't want you to stop. Her mother reached across and squeezed her hand. I want you to keep becoming whoever you're meant to be, even if it scares me sometimes. The warning proved prescient. Over the next week, small incidents started piling up. The baker who usually gave Clara day-old bread for half price suddenly claimed to be sold out. Mrs. Peterson at the general store was cold when Clara came in for thread. 2 of the boarding house's regular guests checked out early without explanation. Evelyn's doing this, Maggie said with absolute certainty. She's telling people to cut you off. I know. Aren't you mad? Clara considered this. Yeah, but also, I expected it. She told me she'd make me regret crossing her. This is her keeping her promise. So what are you going to do? Keep working. What else can I do? But the pressure was real. The boarding house needed those regular guests. Clara needed to be able to buy supplies. The social isolation, subtle but definite, was starting to wear. Caleb noticed during one of his visits. You look tired. I am tired. Tired of small people making small problems feel huge. Evelyn Carter's making trouble? Nothing I can't handle. Caleb's expression darkened. Want me to talk to her? And say what? Stop being mean to Clara or the scary mountain man will get you? That'll definitely help my reputation. Might be worth it. Despite everything, Clara smiled. I appreciate the offer, but this is my fight. I have to figure out how to handle it myself. That's noble. Also stupid, but noble. Thanks for the vote of confidence. They worked in silence for a while. Then Caleb said, You know what the real problem is? Do tell. You're playing by their rules, trying to defend yourself in a game they designed. That's never going to work. So what should I do? Stop defending, start building. Caleb gestured around Ayana's cabin. This thing you're doing here, learning, creating, making connections, that's real. That matters. Everything else is just noise. Easy to say when you're not the one dealing with it. Who says I'm not? You think I don't get grief for being who I am, for living how I live? Caleb's expression was serious. Difference is, I stopped caring what people like Evelyn think a long time ago. Made my life a lot simpler. I can't just not care. Sure you can. Takes practice, but it's possible. He went back to his work. Besides, couple more weeks and those dresses will be done. Mrs. Ashford will be thrilled, she'll tell her fancy friends, and suddenly all those people freezing you out will want back in. That's how it works with hypocrites. Clara wanted to believe him, but experience had taught her that things rarely worked out that neatly. The dresses were completed on a Tuesday evening, exactly 5.5 weeks after the project began. Clara and Ayana worked through the night on final details, last-minute beadwork adjustments, hem corrections, making sure every seam was perfect. By dawn, 3 dresses hung on forms in Ayana's cabin, each one a masterpiece. Lillian's burgundy silk caught the early light, the gold and cream beadwork creating subtle patterns that seemed to shift as you moved around it. Emma's pale green was delicate but not fragile, the silver accents giving it a kind of sophisticated lightness. And Victoria's midnight blue was stunning. The white and pale blue beadwork formed constellations, actual star patterns that Clara and Ayana had researched together. "We did it," Clara whispered. Ayana looked exhausted but satisfied. "We did it." They sat in silence for a moment, just looking at what they'd created. Then Ayana stood up. "Get some sleep. Mrs. Ashford's coming at 2 to collect them. I want you here for that." "Me? Why?" "Because you earned it. Because you're part of this. And because she should know who helped make these dresses." Ayana's expression was firm. "Don't argue. Just be here." Clara went home and slept for 4 hours, then woke up and tried to make herself presentable. Her best dress felt shabby after weeks of working with fine silks and elaborate beadwork, but it was clean and it fit. That would have to be enough. She arrived at Ayana's cabin at 1:30 to find Caleb already there, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "Thought you didn't do social calls," Clara said. "I don't. This is business. I provided materials. I want to make sure the client's satisfied. That's the only reason? That's my story, and I'm sticking to it." Victoria Ashford arrived precisely at 2, and her reaction to the dresses was everything they could have hoped for. She went very still when she saw them, her hand going to her mouth. Then she moved closer, examining each dress with the kind of attention usually reserved for fine art. "These are extraordinary," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "I expected quality, but this—" She looked at Ayana. "This is beyond what I imagined." "Thank you. My daughters will be the envy of Philadelphia. I guarantee it." Victoria's eyes moved to Clara. "And you helped create these?" "I assisted with construction. The design and detail work are all Ayana's." "Don't undersell yourself," Ayana interjected. "You did half the beadwork on Lillian's dress and all the structural work on Emma's. Own what you did." Victoria looked between them with interest. "You two work well together." "We're learning," Ayana said. "She's a quick study." Victoria carefully packed the dresses. She'd brought special boxes lined with tissue paper and then handed Ayana an envelope. Inside was the second half of the payment, plus extra. "What's this?" Ayana asked, counting the bills. "Bonus. For exceptional work, and because I'm already thinking about future commissions." Victoria smiled. "I'll be in touch. I have friends who would kill for pieces like these." After she left, Ayana stared at the money in her hands. "We did it," Clara said again, and this time it felt real, final. "Yeah." Ayana looked up, and there were tears in her eyes. "Yeah, we did." Caleb cleared his throat awkwardly. "Right. Well, I'm going to go before this gets too emotional." "Coward," Ayana called after him. "Absolutely," he called back, but Clara saw his smile as he left, quick and genuine. The impact of Victoria Ashford's satisfaction rippled through Red Hollow faster than Clara expected. Within days, word had spread that the fancy Eastern lady had commissioned dresses from Ayana Hollow Creek and been so pleased she'd paid extra. Suddenly, people who'd been avoiding Clara were curious. The cold shoulders thawed slightly. Sarah Chen was the first to approach Clara at the boarding house. "Is it true Mrs. Ashford ordered multiple dresses?" "3. 1 for her and 2 for her daughters." "And she was happy with them?" "Very happy." Sarah's expression was calculating. "My cousin's getting married in Sacramento this fall. She's been looking for a dressmaker, someone who can do something unique. Do you think Ayana would be interested?" Clara felt a surge of protective instinct. "I can ask, but Ayana's not cheap, and she won't compromise her vision to satisfy someone else's." "Fair enough. Will you introduce us?" "Sure." Over the next week, 3 more women approached Clara with similar requests. 2 were genuine, women who'd seen Clara's white deerskin dress at the dance and been impressed. One was Evelyn's friend Margaret, clearly sent on a scouting mission. "I don't think Ayana takes commissions from people who actively work to undermine her business," Clara said sweetly. Margaret's face flushed. "I never—" "You were there when Evelyn tried to turn the town against me. You backed her up. So no, I won't introduce you to Ayana. Find another seamstress." Word of that interaction spread too. Clara worried it would cause more problems, but instead it seemed to earn her a kind of grudging respect. She'd drawn a line. People could accept that or not. The Sunday social at the church was the real test. Clara attended with Thomas Webb as he'd promised, wearing her white deerskin dress again because she didn't have anything else remotely appropriate. The moment she walked in, conversation stopped. But this time, the silence felt different, less hostile, more interested. Mrs. Harrison approached almost immediately. "Miss Whitmore, I heard the most interesting news about those dresses you and Miss Hollow Creek made for Mrs. Ashford." "Did you? Is it true she paid a premium for the work?" Clara chose her words carefully. "Mrs. Ashford was very pleased with the quality and craftsmanship, yes." "Remarkable." Mrs. Harrison's expression was calculating. "You know, I've been thinking about having a new dress made for my sister's wedding in Denver. Something distinctive. Perhaps you could arrange an introduction?" And just like that, Clara understood. These people didn't care about her. They didn't care about Ayana or the artistic merit of the work. They cared about status, about access to something exclusive, about being able to say they had a dress from the same seamstress who'd impressed Victoria Ashford. It should have made her angry. Instead, Clara felt a kind of weary amusement. "I'll talk to Ayana," she said, "but she's very selective about her clients." "Of course, naturally." Thomas appeared at her elbow, offering his arm. "Dance?" They moved onto the floor and Clara was aware of eyes following them, some approving, some still skeptical, all of them watching. "You're smiling," Thomas observed. "Am I?" "Like you know a secret." Clara thought about Ayana's cabin, about Caleb's visits, about the quiet satisfaction of creating something beautiful with her own hands, about how the validation she desperately wanted from these people suddenly felt less important than the work itself. "Maybe I do," she said. The dance continued around them, the same rituals, the same hierarchies, the same careful maintenance of social order. But Clara was starting to understand that she didn't have to accept their version of where she fit. She could carve out her own space, build her own connections, define her own worth. Evelyn watched from across the room, her expression unreadable. Their eyes met briefly, and Clara saw something complex there. Anger, yes, but also a kind of baffled frustration. She'd tried to destroy Clara and instead had somehow made her stronger. Clara looked away first, not because she was intimidated, but because Evelyn Carter simply didn't matter anymore, not the way she once had. Later, when the evening wound down and people started drifting home, Clara found herself outside again, looking up at the stars. The same stars Ayana had researched to create the patterns on Victoria's dress. The same sky that covered Caleb's cabin in the high country. "You did good tonight." Clara turned to find Caleb emerging from the shadows, his usual trick. "How long have you been out here?" "Long enough to see you handle yourself like you've been doing this your whole life." "I was terrified the entire time." "Being terrified and doing it anyway, that's called courage." He leaned against the church wall. Ayana says you're getting more commission requests. 5 so far. Real ones, I mean. Not counting the ones who just want to spy. You gonna help with them? Clara considered this. I don't know. Part of me wants to, but part of me wonders if I should be doing something else. Something more mine. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You know what I think? I suspect you're going to tell me. I think you're at one of those crossroads. You can keep assisting Ayana, which is good work and decent money, or you can start building something of your own. Both are valid. But you've got to choose. That's not helpful. Wasn't trying to be helpful, was trying to be honest. He straightened up. Whatever you decide, though, make sure it's your decision, not what you think you should do or what other people expect, what you actually want. And if I don't know what I want, then you try things until you figure it out. That's what living is. A series of experiments, some successful, some disasters, all of them teaching you something. He walked away, leaving Clara alone with the stars and her thoughts. Inside, the last of the dancers were leaving, spilling out into the night with laughter and goodbyes. Clara watched them go, all these people whose approval had once seemed so vital, whose acceptance she'd craved so desperately. She didn't crave it anymore. Somewhere in the past few weeks, between learning beadwork and late-night construction sessions and standing up to Evelyn Carter, Clara had found something more valuable than their approval. She'd found herself, and that was worth more than all the spring dances in the world. The decision came on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after the social, when Clara was elbow-deep in dishwater at the boarding house, and a traveling merchant named Frederick Lansing walked through the door. He was the type of man who wore his wealth like a costume, expensive suit that didn't quite fit right, gold watch chain displayed prominently, shoes polished to an aggressive shine. He swept into the dining room like he owned it, ignoring Clara's mother's polite greeting to survey the space with obvious disdain. This will have to do, he announced to no one in particular. I need lodging for 3 nights while my business concludes in this godforsaken outpost. Clara's mother's smile tightened, but her voice remained professional. We have a room available, Mr. Lansing. Frederick Lansing of the Boston Lansings. He said it like it should mean something. I'll require breakfast at 7 sharp, dinner at 6, and absolute quiet after 9. I have important correspondence to attend to. Of course, sir. Clara will show you to your room. Clara dried her hands and led Lansing upstairs, carrying his surprisingly heavy bag. He followed her, making small, disapproving noises at every squeaky floorboard and faded carpet runner. You're the girl, aren't you? He said suddenly. Clara stopped at the door to his room. Sir? The one who caused all that fuss at the church dance, wore some ridiculous native costume and made a scene. Heat crawled up Clara's neck. I wore a dress made by a local craftswoman. I wouldn't call it a costume. Semantics. Lansing waved his hand dismissively. Victoria Ashford won't stop talking about it. She's shown those dresses to half of Boston society, going on about authentic frontier artistry and cultural integration. He snorted. Load of nonsense, if you ask me. Clara set his bag down carefully, fighting the urge to drop it. No one asked you, sir. Lansing's eyebrows shot up. Excuse me? Your room. Breakfast is at 7, dinner at 6, as you requested. If you need anything, ring the bell. Clara turned to leave. Wait just a moment. But Clara was already walking away, her heart pounding. She heard Lansing sputter behind her, but didn't stop. Downstairs, her mother was waiting with raised eyebrows. What did you say to him? Nothing he didn't deserve to hear. Her mother looked torn between exasperation and pride. Clara, I know we need the business, but Mama, I'm so tired of men like him walking in here and treating us like we're lucky to take their money while they insult everything we do. Clara slumped into a chair. I can't keep doing this. Doing what? This. Working myself to exhaustion for people who don't respect me. Smiling through insults because we need the income. Pretending it's fine. Her mother sat down across from her. What's the alternative? Clara thought about Ayana's cabin, about the quiet satisfaction of creating something beautiful, about the stack of commission requests that had been piling up, each one representing a possibility she hadn't seriously considered until now. I want to work with Ayana full-time, really work with her, not just assist on the side. Learn everything she'll teach me." The words came out in a rush. "I know it's risky. I know it means leaving the boarding house short-handed, but Mama, I'm 22 years old and I've spent my whole life doing what was safe and practical and expected. For once, I want to do something because it's what I actually want." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Your father left us this boarding house. It's been our security, our stability. But you know what else he left? A journal full of dreams he never pursued because they weren't practical." She reached across and took Clara's hand. "Don't end up with a journal full of regrets." "You mean it?" "I mean, talk to Ayana first. Make sure she actually wants a full-time partner before you quit your paying job. But yes, if this is what you want, really want, then I support you." Clara threw her arms around her mother, nearly knocking over the chair. When she pulled back, her mother was smiling through tears. "Now go upstairs and apologize to Mr. Lansing before he demands a refund." Clara groaned but did as she was told. She found Lansing unpacking his bag, still muttering under his breath. "Mr. Lansing, I apologize for my rudeness earlier." He turned, his expression sour. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "You told me. Boston Lansings. Very impressive, I'm sure." "I could destroy this establishment with one word to the right people." Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not power, but insecurity. A man who needed to constantly assert his importance because deep down he suspected he didn't have any. "You could try," Clara said evenly. "But we've been running this boarding house for 15 years. We have regular customers who come back year after year because my mother treats them with respect and provides clean rooms and good food. Your one word means less than you think." Lansing's face went red. "How dare—" However, Clara interrupted, "I was still rude and that was wrong. So I'm apologizing. Take it or don't, but either way, dinner's at 6. She left before he could respond, her hands shaking but her head high. The next morning, she walked to Ayana's cabin earlier than usual. The sun was just cresting the hills, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. She found Ayana already at work, sketching designs for a new commission. "You're early," Ayana said without looking up. "I need to talk to you about something." "That sounds ominous." Clara sat down across from her. "I want to work with you full-time. As a real partner, not just an assistant. I want to learn everything you'll teach me and help build this into something bigger." Ayana set down her pencil. "That's a big decision." "I know. Working with me full-time means giving up security. The boarding house is steady income. This?" She gestured around the cabin. "This is unpredictable. Some months will do well. Others we might barely scrape by." "I understand that." "Do you?" Ayana's expression was serious. "I'm not trying to talk you out of it. I'm trying to make sure you know what you're choosing. This isn't romantic. It's hard work, difficult clients, long hours, and no guarantee of success." "I know, but I've been thinking about what Caleb said, about choosing what I actually want instead of what I think I should want. And this—" Clara gestured to the sketches, the fabric samples, the tools of their trade. "This is what I want." Ayana studied her face for a long moment. Then she smiled. "All right, but I have conditions." "Name them." "First, you take on your own clients. Not just assist with mine. You design, you negotiate, you build your own reputation." Clara's stomach fluttered with nerves. "Okay." "Second, you learn the business side. Pricing, contracts, dealing with difficult customers. Pretty dresses don't mean anything if you can't get paid for them." "Agreed." "Third, you teach me about European construction techniques. I know native methods inside and out, but you've got skills I don't have. This has to be a real partnership, which means we both bring something to the table." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I can do that." "Then welcome to the business, partner." Ayana extended her hand, and Clara shook it, the gesture formal and binding. The transition wasn't smooth. Clara gave her mother 2 weeks' notice to find replacement help at the boarding house, which meant 2 weeks of working double shifts, mornings and afternoons at the boarding house, evenings at Ayana's cabin. She was exhausted, running on coffee and determination, but also more energized than she'd felt in years. Frederick Lansing left after 3 days, making pointed comments about the declining standards of frontier hospitality. Clara smiled politely and didn't offer a discount. Her first solo commission came from an unexpected source. Thomas Webb's mother, of all people, requested a meeting. Clara arrived at the Webb house with her heart in her throat, certain this was some kind of setup. Mrs. Webb received her in a parlor so pristine it looked like no one had ever actually sat in it. She was a formidable woman, all sharp angles and sharper eyes. "Miss Whitmore, thank you for coming." "Of course, Mrs. Webb. I'll be direct. My sister is getting married in San Francisco this fall. She's asked me to arrange for her wedding dress, and after seeing your work at the spring dance, I believe you might be suitable for the task." Clara's mind raced. A wedding dress. Not an alteration or a simple day dress. A wedding dress. The most important garment most women ever wore. "That's quite an honor," Clara said carefully. "But I should be clear. I work in partnership with Ayanna Hollow Creek. Any dress I create would incorporate both our techniques." Mrs. Webb's expression didn't change. "I'm aware. That's actually what I'm requesting. My sister is a bit unconventional. She wants something distinctive, something no one else in San Francisco will have." "Tell me about her." What followed was an hour-long conversation that revealed depths to Mrs. Webb that Clara hadn't expected. Her sister Charlotte was 42, marrying for the first time a widower with 3 children. She was practical, independent, and had explicitly forbidden anything virginal and ridiculous. "She wants to look like herself," Mrs. Webb said, "just the best version of herself. Can you do that?" Clara thought about what Ayanna had taught her, about how clothes should honor the person wearing them, not try to transform them into something they weren't. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." They negotiated price. Mrs. Webb drove a hard bargain, but was ultimately fair, and Clara left with her first major solo commission and a deadline that made her palms sweat. Ayanna's reaction was characteristically blunt. "Wedding dress? For your first solo project? You don't start small, do you?" "Is it too much?" "Probably, but we'll manage." Ayanna pulled out her sketching materials. "Tell me everything about this Charlotte." They spent 3 days just on design, sketching, and discarding ideas, arguing about construction methods, pushing each other toward better solutions. Clara discovered she had opinions, strong ones, about things like sleeve construction and neckline depth. Ayanna challenged every choice, forcing Clara to defend her decisions or abandon them for better options. "This is what partnership looks like," Ayanna said during one particularly heated debate about hem weight. "Not always agreeing, sometimes fighting, but always pushing toward the best possible result." The dress took shape slowly. They used cream silk as the base, not white, which would wash out Charlotte's complexion, with subtle bronze beadwork that suggested autumn leaves without being literal. The cut was elegant but practical, acknowledging that Charlotte would need to move, sit, and actually function during her wedding day. Caleb showed up one evening with a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was more of that rare white deerskin, treated to match the cream silk. "Thought you might want this for trim or details," he said, not meeting their eyes. Clara stared at it. "Caleb, this must be worth you." "Don't care what it's worth. It's sitting in my cabin doing nothing. Might as well be part of something beautiful." After he left, Ayanna shook her head. "That man. For someone who claims not to care about people, he sure does a lot of caring." They incorporated the deerskin into the bodice, creating a subtle pattern that echoed traditional native designs but felt contemporary. It was exactly the kind of cultural fusion that made their work distinctive. The wedding dress was completed in 8 weeks. When Charlotte arrived to collect it, accompanied by Mrs. Webb, her reaction was everything Clara had hoped for. "Oh," Charlotte whispered, touching the fabric reverently. "Oh, it's perfect." She tried it on in Ayanna's back room, and when she emerged, even Mrs. Webb looked moved. "You look like yourself," Mrs. Webb said quietly. "Just radiant." Charlotte turned to Clara, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for seeing me, for creating something that honors who I actually am instead of who people think I should be." Clara understood exactly what she meant. Word of Charlotte's dress spread through a different network than Victoria Ashford's society connections. This was women talking to women, sharing information about dressmakers who actually listened, who created clothing that felt like armor and art combined. More commissions came. A teacher wanted a dress durable enough for daily wear but beautiful enough to wear to town meetings. A ranch owner's daughter needed riding clothes that didn't sacrifice style for function. A widow requested something that acknowledged her grief without drowning her in black crepe. Each project taught Clara something new. She learned to read between the lines of what clients said they wanted to figure out what they actually needed. She learned to stand firm on design choices that served the garment while remaining flexible on elements that were purely personal preference. She learned to price her work fairly without undervaluing her skill. And slowly, the partnership with Ayanna evolved from teacher-student into something more equal. They challenged each other, learned from each other, covered for each other's weaknesses, and amplified each other's strengths. 3 months into their official partnership, they were working late when Caleb arrived with unexpected news. "There's a trader coming through next week, William Morrison, out of Denver. He deals in high-end goods for wealthy clients, furniture, art, luxury items. Heard about what you two are doing and wants to talk business." Ayanna looked skeptical. "What kind of business? Distribution, maybe? I don't know the details. But Morrison's connected. If he likes your work, he could open doors to clients you can't reach on your own." Clara and Ayanna exchanged glances. They'd been so focused on individual commissions that the idea of larger-scale distribution hadn't occurred to them. "When's he arriving?" Clara asked. "Tuesday afternoon. He'll be staying at the hotel for 3 days." They spent the weekend preparing, selecting their best pieces to show, practicing their presentation, arguing about pricing and terms. By Monday night, Clara was a bundle of nerves. "What if he hates everything?" she said, pacing Ayanna's cabin. "Then he hates everything, and we continue as we are. We're not depending on this, Clara. We're already successful. This is just a possibility." "A big possibility." "Which is why you're terrified. Big possibilities are always terrifying. Doesn't mean they're not worth pursuing." William Morrison turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and an obvious appreciation for quality. He examined their work with the kind of attention that suggested he actually knew what he was looking at. "Interesting," he murmured, studying the beadwork on one of Clara's recent dresses. "Very interesting. You're combining techniques in ways I haven't seen before." "That's the goal," Ayanna said. "We're not trying to replicate either traditional native work or European fashion. We're creating something new." "And the market for this?" "Growing. We have more commission requests than we can handle." Morrison nodded slowly. "I represent several wealthy families in Denver, San Francisco, and Chicago. They're always looking for distinctive pieces, things their society friends don't have. I think your work could appeal to that market." "What exactly are you proposing?" Clara asked. "A trial arrangement. You create 3 pieces, your choice of style, and I'll present them to my clients. If they sell, we discuss a longer-term relationship. I take a commission on sales, you get access to a much larger customer base." It sounded too good to be true, which made Clara immediately suspicious. "What's the catch?" Morrison smiled. "Smart question. The catch is that my clients have high standards and short attention spans. If the first pieces don't sell, they'll move on to the next shiny thing, and you'll have wasted time and materials. Also, I require exclusivity on the pieces I represent. You can't sell the same designs through other channels." Ayanna leaned back in her chair. "We'll need to think about it." "Of course. I'll be in town until Thursday. Let me know by then." After he left, Clara and Ayanna sat in silence for a long moment. "What do you think?" Clara asked. "I think it's a risk, but most worthwhile things are. We'd have to create pieces without guaranteed payment. That ties up our time and materials." "True, but if they sell, the exposure could be enormous." Ayanna drummed her fingers on the table. "What does your gut say?" Clara thought about it. "My gut says Morrison is legitimate. He knows the market, he appreciates quality, and he's not promising more than he can deliver. But my gut also says we should be careful about exclusivity. We've built our reputation on being available to our community. I don't want to lose that." "Agreed." So we negotiate. 3 trial pieces, but we maintain the right to take direct commissions outside his network. And we set our own prices. He can take his commission, but we control the base cost. They spent the next 2 days hammering out terms. Morrison proved willing to negotiate, which increased Clara's trust in him. By Thursday, they had an agreement Clara felt good about. The trial pieces took 6 weeks to complete. They chose designs that showcased their range: an evening dress in deep forest green with intricate beadwork, a riding outfit that blended practicality with unexpected elegance, and a day dress in soft gray with subtle native-inspired trim. Morrison collected them with obvious satisfaction. "These are exactly what I hoped for. I'll send word when I have news." The waiting was excruciating. Clara threw herself into other projects, trying not to obsess over whether Morrison's clients would appreciate their work. Ayana pretended to be unconcerned, but Clara noticed her checking the mail more frequently than usual. The letter arrived 5 weeks later. Morrison's clients had purchased all 3 pieces. 2 wanted additional commissions. He was ready to discuss a longer-term arrangement. "We did it," Clara whispered, staring at the letter. Ayana read over her shoulder. "We did it." They celebrated quietly that evening, just Clara, Ayana, and Caleb sharing a bottle of whiskey Caleb had been saving. The alcohol was rough and burned going down, but Clara didn't care. She felt invincible. "To partnership," Ayana toasted. "To taking risks," Clara added. "To women who don't take no for an answer," Caleb finished. They drank, and Clara felt the future opening up before her, uncertain, challenging, full of possibility. But success brought its own complications. The increased workload meant they needed help, which led to hiring Sarah Chen's younger cousin May to assist with basic construction. The space in Ayana's cabin was no longer adequate, which meant looking for a larger workspace. And the money, while good, brought questions about how to manage growth without losing what made their work special. "We're at another crossroads," Ayana said one evening, surveying the cramped cabin workspace. "We can stay small, maintain complete control, and turn down commissions we don't have time for. Or we can expand, which means more risk but also more opportunity. What do you want to do?" "I'm asking what you want to do. We're partners. This decision affects both of us equally." Clara looked around the cabin that had become her second home. She thought about the journey from that first night, crying in the dirt in her ruined dress, to this moment, building a business, creating beauty, making her own choices. "I want to expand," she said. "Not because I'm greedy, but because I think we have something worth sharing. Women deserve clothes that honor them. We can help make that happen. We should help make that happen." Ayana smiled. "Then let's do it." They found a space on the edge of town, a former feed store that had been sitting empty for 2 years. The owner, desperate to rent it, offered them reasonable terms. It needed work. The roof leaked, the floor was uneven, and it smelled faintly of old grain, but it had good light and enough space for multiple workstations. Caleb recruited some friends to help with repairs. Clara and Ayana scrounged materials and secondhand furniture. Slowly, the feed store transformed into something that looked like a real workshop. The grand opening was small but meaningful. They invited their regular clients, Morrison sent a congratulatory telegram, and even Mrs. Webb showed up with a bottle of champagne. "To Red Hollow's finest dressmakers," she toasted, and Clara felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. Not everyone was pleased about their success. Evelyn Carter made pointed comments about standards declining and questionable business practices. A few of the more conservative townspeople grumbled about mixing cultures and overstepping boundaries. But Clara found she didn't care as much as she once would have. Their work spoke for itself. The women who wore their dresses felt beautiful and powerful. That mattered more than Evelyn's disapproval. One afternoon, about 2 months after opening the workshop, Claire was fitting a client when Frederick Lansing walked through the door. She recognized him immediately. That same self-important strut, that same expensive but ill-fitting suit. He didn't recognize her at first. "I need to speak with the proprietress." "That would be me," Clara said, straightening up. "And my partner, Ayana Hollow Creek." Lansing's eyes widened slightly. "You, the rude girl from the boarding house. The honest girl from the boarding house," Clara corrected. "What can I help you with, Mr. Lansing?" He looked uncomfortable. "I have a business proposition. My niece saw one of your dresses at a society event in Boston, one of Mrs. Ashford's pieces. She's demanded I secure something similar for her debut." Clara felt a smile tugging at her lips. "Your niece has excellent taste. Can you create something appropriate for a Boston debut or not?" "We can, for the right price and under the right terms." What followed was a negotiation where Clara stood her ground on every point: price, timeline, creative control, payment schedule. Lansing blustered and objected and tried to intimidate her with his Boston connections. Clara remained unmoved. Finally, frustrated, Lansing said, "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" "Yes," Clara said calmly. "A man who insulted my work and my community, who tried to use his supposed importance as a weapon, and who is now asking for my help. The question isn't whether I know who you are, Mr. Lansing. The question is whether you understand that I don't actually need your business. We have more commissions than we can handle. I'm offering to take yours as a courtesy, on my terms. Take it or leave it." Lansing stared at her, his face cycling through several shades of red. Then, to Clara's surprise, he laughed, a short, sharp bark of sound. "You've got spine, I'll give you that. Fine, your terms, but the dress better be spectacular." "It will be. We don't make anything less." After he left, Ayanna emerged from the back room where she'd been listening to the entire exchange. "That," she said with obvious pride, "was beautiful. You didn't budge an inch." Clara's hands were shaking slightly from adrenaline, but she felt triumphant. "I learned from the best." "Damn right you did." The Boston debut dress became one of their signature pieces, blush pink silk with intricate beadwork that incorporated both traditional native patterns and Victorian-era design elements. When Lansing's niece wrote to thank them, she included a photograph of herself wearing the dress. She looked radiant. More importantly, she looked like herself. As autumn settled over Red Hollow, Clara found herself reflecting on how much had changed in just 6 months. She'd gone from invisible to visible, from assistant to partner, from accepting what life handed her to actively building the future she wanted. Standing in the workshop one evening, watching the last light paint everything gold, Clara felt something she'd never quite experienced before. Not happiness, exactly. Happiness was too simple a word. This was deeper, more solid. This was belonging. Not to a place or a group of people, but to herself, to her choices, to the life she was actively creating with her own hands. Ayanna came up beside her, following her gaze out the window. Thinking big thoughts? Thinking about how strange life is. How one ruined dress led to all of this. "Wasn't the dress," Ayanna said. "Was you. You could have stayed home that night, could have given up, could have let Evelyn Carter win. But you didn't. You chose differently." "I had help." "Sure. But help doesn't mean anything if you're not willing to take it, if you're not willing to believe you're worth helping." Ayanna squeezed her shoulder. "You were always worth it, Clara. You just needed to see it yourself." Clara thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, terrified, invisible, convinced her only value was in staying small and quiet and apologetic. That girl felt like a stranger now. She'd been wrong about so many things. Wrong to think she needed to shrink herself to be acceptable. Wrong to believe other people's cruelty meant she deserved it. Wrong to assume the life she'd been living was the only life available to her. But she'd been right about one thing. She'd been right to hope. To believe that maybe, somewhere beneath all the fear and conditioning and learned helplessness, there was a person worth fighting for. She'd found that person, and she was just getting started. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with a ferocity that caught everyone off guard. By November, Red Hollow was buried under 2 feet of snow, the streets transformed into white corridors that muffled sound and isolated the town from the outside world. The workshop became a refuge. Clara and Ayanna kept the stove burning constantly, the heat and lamplight creating a pocket of warmth against the brutal cold outside. May proved invaluable, not just for her skill with a needle, but for her steady presence during the long hours when commissions piled up and deadlines loomed. They were working on a particularly complex order, matching dresses for 3 sisters in Denver, when the door banged open and Caleb stumbled in, covered in snow and looking more agitated than Clara had ever seen him. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. Ayanna looked up from her beadwork. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where a wagon broke an axle 2 miles outside town, and there's a woman and 3 kids stranded in this weather with nowhere to go." Clara was already reaching for her coat. "Where are they now?" "I got them to the church. Reverend Patterson's wife is trying to get them warm, but they've got nothing. Lost most of their supplies when the wagon tipped. They're heading to Oregon, thought they could make it through before the worst of winter hit. Caleb shook his head. Stupid timing, but they didn't have much choice. Husband died 6 months back. Wife's trying to get to family out west. What do they need? Ayana asked, already moving toward the storage area where they kept extra fabric. Everything. Food, warm clothes, a place to stay until the weather breaks and we can fix their wagon. Caleb looked uncomfortable. I know you two are busy, but don't be an idiot, Ayana interrupted. Of course we'll help. They closed the workshop early and headed to the church, where they found a woman who couldn't have been more than 30, trying to warm 3 children who ranged from maybe 8 years old down to a toddler. The woman's face was drawn with exhaustion and barely concealed panic. Mrs. Hayes, Reverend Patterson's wife was saying, we'll figure something out. The church has some blankets. I'm Catherine Hayes, Clara interrupted gently. And this is my business partner, Ayana Hollow Creek. We have fabric and supplies that might help. Can we take a look at what you need? The relief on the woman's face was painful to see. I can't pay you. Not right now. Everything I have is tied up in that wagon and getting us to Oregon. We're not asking for payment, Ayana said firmly. Show us what you've got. What they had was almost nothing. The children's clothes were threadbare, inadequate for mountain winter. The woman, Mrs. Hayes, had one thin coat that had seen better days. Their blankets were damp from snow and wouldn't provide nearly enough warmth. Clara and Ayana exchanged a look. Then Ayana turned to Caleb. Can you get them set up at the boarding house? Clara's mother will have space. Already talked to her. She's preparing rooms now. Good. Clara and I will work through the night. We can have basic warm clothing ready by morning. Not fancy, but functional. Mrs. Hayes's eyes filled with tears. Why are you doing this? Clara thought about a night 6 months ago when she'd been the one desperate and alone, and strangers had helped her for no reason except that it was the right thing to do. Because we can, she said simply. They worked through the night just like they had for Victoria Ashford's commission, but this time the stakes felt different, more immediate. These weren't society dresses for wealthy clients. These were warm coats and sturdy pants and thick mittens that would mean the difference between suffering and survival. Caleb stayed to help, cutting fabric and running materials back and forth. May showed up around midnight with thermoses of hot coffee and her own sewing kit. By dawn, they had 3 complete sets of winter clothing for the children and a warm coat for Mrs. Hayes. This is too much, Mrs. Hayes protested when they delivered everything to the boarding house. I can't accept. You're not accepting charity, Ayana said. You're accepting help. There's a difference. And when you get to Oregon and you're settled and you have the means, you'll help someone else who needs it. That's how this works. Mrs. Hayes pulled her youngest child, a little girl, maybe 3 years old, closer and nodded, unable to speak. The wagon repairs took 2 weeks. During that time, Mrs. Hayes and her children became part of Red Hollow's temporary community. The older boy, Jacob, helped Caleb with the wagon repairs. The middle child, girl named Sarah, spent hours at the workshop watching Clara and Ayana work with fascinated attention. Can you teach me? Sarah asked one afternoon, her fingers tracing a pattern of beadwork. Teach you what? Clara asked. How to make beautiful things. Clara looked at Ayana, who nodded slightly. Sure. Come here. What started as a simple lesson evolved into something more. Sarah had natural talent, her small fingers surprisingly deft with needle and thread. By the end of the first week, she was helping with basic construction on simpler projects. You're good at this, Clara told her. Really good. My mama used to sew. Before Papa died, she made all our clothes. Sarah's expression was solemn. She doesn't anymore. She's too tired now. Clara understood tired. She understood the weight of responsibility that crushed creativity out of people who once loved creating. When the wagon was finally repaired and the weather cleared enough for travel, Mrs. Hayes came to the workshop to say goodbye. She pressed a worn Bible into Clara's hands. It's all I have to give, she said. It was my husband's. Please take it. Clara wanted to refuse. The Bible clearly meant something to this woman. But she saw that Mrs. Hayes needed to give something back, needed to feel like the exchange was fair, even though it couldn't be. Thank you, Clara said, accepting it. Travel safe." "You saved our lives," Mrs. Hayes said quietly. "I won't forget that, and I'll make sure my children don't forget it either." After they left, Clara found Sarah had left something behind, a small piece of fabric with careful, precise stitching. A first attempt at beadwork, uneven but earnest. Clara tucked it into her pocket like a talisman. "That felt good," she said to Ayanna. "Yeah, it did. We should do more of it, not just helping people who stumble into town, but actively seeking out ways to use what we do to make things better." Ayanna raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "I don't know exactly, but we have skills and resources now. We could teach other women. We could create opportunities." Clara was thinking out loud, the ideas forming as she spoke. What if we hired women who needed work, taught them the trade, gave them skills they could use to support themselves? That's ambitious. Is it impossible? No, but it would mean changing how we work, taking on a different kind of responsibility. Ayanna was quiet for a moment. "But I like it. I like the idea of creating something that outlasts us, that gives other women what we've given each other, choice." The idea germinated slowly over the next few months. They started small, hiring 2 more women to help with basic construction. Then they formalized training, setting aside specific hours to teach technique, rather than just assigning tasks. Word spread, and soon they had more applicants than they could accommodate. "We need more space," Clara said one evening, surveying the workshop that was once again cramped with people and materials. "We need more funding," Ayanna countered. "Space costs money." The solution came from an unexpected source. William Morrison arrived in March with a proposal. His clients loved their work, but several had expressed interest in investing in the business itself, not just buying pieces, but becoming stakeholders in the enterprise. "What would that mean?" Clara asked suspiciously. "It would mean capital for expansion, better equipment, more space, the ability to hire and train more workers. In exchange, the investors would receive a percentage of profits." "And control?" Morrison smiled. "I told them you'd ask that. The answer is no. You and Miss Hollow Creek would maintain full creative and operational control. The investors are interested in the financial return, not in running the business." Clara and Ayanna spent a week reviewing the proposal, consulting with a lawyer Morrison recommended, and arguing through every possible scenario. In the end, they agreed to take investment from 2 of Morrison's clients, both women who'd purchased their dresses and understood what made the work special. The capital allowed them to purchase the building next to their current workshop and knock through the wall, doubling their space. They hired 4 more women, established a formal apprenticeship program, and began taking on larger contracts that required more hands. But success brought visibility, and visibility brought conflict. The trouble started when Clara received an invitation to present at the Women's Association meeting, a group of Red Hollow's most prominent women who met monthly to discuss civic improvements and charitable works. It was exactly the kind of social acceptance Clara had once craved, and now it made her wary. "It's a trap," Caleb said flatly when she told him about it. "You don't know that. I know Evelyn Carter's mother runs that association. I know they've ignored everything you've done for months, and now suddenly they want you to present? Yeah, it's a trap." Ayanna was more measured. "Maybe, maybe not, but you should go anyway." "Why?" "Because hiding from them gives them power. Showing up, telling your story, making them see what you've built, that takes power back." Ayanna met her eyes. "Besides, you've got nothing to be ashamed of. Let them try to tear you down. They'll just embarrass themselves." The Women's Association met in the mayor's house, a sprawling place that screamed old money and established power. Clara arrived wearing one of her own designs, deep burgundy with subtle beadwork, professional but unmistakably her aesthetic. Mrs. Carter greeted her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Miss Whitmore, so glad you could join us." The room was full of familiar faces. Mrs. Webb, who nodded politely. Mrs. Harrison, who looked uncomfortable. And Evelyn, sitting in the back row with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. Clara's presentation was supposed to be about the business, how they'd started, what they did, their plans for expansion. But as she spoke, she realized she wasn't just talking about dressmaking. She was talking about creating opportunities for women who'd been told they had no options. about building something that honored different traditions instead of erasing them, about the radical act of believing women deserved clothes that made them feel powerful instead of diminished. The room was silent when she finished. Then Mrs. Webb started clapping, and others joined in, some enthusiastically, others reluctantly. Mrs. Carter stood up. "Thank you for that interesting presentation, Miss Whitmore. I wonder if you could clarify something. You mentioned hiring women from outside the traditional town community. Are you referring to native workers?" Here it was, the real question underneath all the polite inquiry. "I'm referring to women who want to learn a trade and are willing to work hard," Clara said evenly. "Their background is irrelevant. Their skill and dedication are what matter." "But surely you see how that could be problematic. Mixing different groups, different standards. I see how it could be problematic for people who benefit from keeping those groups separated," Clara interrupted. "I don't see how it's problematic for the women themselves, who are learning skills and earning fair wages and building better futures." The room erupted in whispers. Mrs. Carter's face flushed. "That's a very radical position, Miss Whitmore." "Is it? Or is it just decent?" Clara looked around the room, meeting eyes directly. "Most of you have bought our dresses. You've complimented our work. You've benefited from what we create. But that creation happens because women from different backgrounds work together, learn from each other, build something none of us could build alone. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe the problem isn't with us. Maybe it's with you." The silence was absolute. Clara had crossed a line and she knew it. You didn't talk to Red Hollow's social elite like that. You didn't challenge their assumptions to their faces. But she was done pretending, done performing the version of herself that these women found acceptable. Mrs. Webb stood up. "I think Miss Whitmore raises valid points. My sister's wedding dress was extraordinary precisely because it incorporated techniques from different traditions. Perhaps instead of questioning her methods, we should be asking how we can support what she's building." "I agree," another voice said. "Mrs. Peterson from the general store. My daughter's been apprenticing at the workshop for 2 months. She's learned more about business and craft than she ever would have staying home. I'm grateful for the opportunity." Others began to speak up. Women who'd bought dresses, women whose daughters or nieces or friends had been helped by Clara and Ayanna's work. Not everyone, not even most, but enough to shift the energy in the room. Mrs. Carter tried to regain control, but the meeting dissolved into arguments and side conversations. Clara slipped out during the chaos, her heart pounding. Outside, she found Evelyn waiting on the porch. "That was quite a performance," Evelyn said. Clara was too tired for games. "What do you want, Evelyn?" "I want to understand how you did it, how you went from nothing to—" She gestured vaguely. How you made people care." "I didn't make anyone care. I just stopped pretending to be smaller than I am." Evelyn laughed, but it sounded bitter. "Easy to say when it worked out for you." "You think this was easy? You think any of this was easy?" Clara shook her head. "You destroyed my dress. You tried to humiliate me. You turned people against me. And yeah, I survived it. But don't act like survival is the same thing as easy." "I was cruel," Evelyn said quietly. "I know that. I don't expect you to forgive me." "Good, because I don't forgive you. What you did was wrong, and no amount of retrospective regret changes that." "So what now? We're just enemies forever?" Clara considered this. "We're not enemies. We're just not anything. You don't matter to me anymore, Evelyn. Not in the way you think you do. You're not important enough to hate." She walked away, leaving Evelyn standing alone on that perfect porch in front of that perfect house, and Clara felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no vindication. Just the simple truth that Evelyn Carter no longer had power over her. Spring arrived with its usual chaos of mud and renewal. The workshop was thriving, 8 employees now, more commissions than they could handle, and a waiting list that stretched into next year. Morrison sent regular orders from his network. Victoria Ashford wrote letters full of praise and additional business. Even Frederick Lansing grudgingly admitted that his niece's debut had been the success of the season. But the real victory wasn't the business success, it was the women. May had become skilled enough to take on her own clients. Mrs. Peterson's daughter Annie was designing pieces that sold as fast as they could make them. Two other apprentices were close to completing their training and already fielding offers from dressmakers in other towns who'd heard about their skills. "We're creating competition for ourselves," Ayana observed one evening. "Good," Clara said. "That means we're succeeding." They were reviewing plans for a second location, possibly in Denver or San Francisco, when Caleb arrived with news. "Railroad's coming through," he said. "Official announcement next week. Red Hollow's getting a proper station, which means more people, more commerce, more everything." Clara and Ayana exchanged glances. A railroad station would change everything. More potential clients, yes, but also more competition, more outsiders, more pressure to conform to standards set by bigger cities. "How do you feel about that?" Clara asked Ayana. "Terrified, excited, both at once." Ayana smiled. "Same as always." The next year brought changes faster than anyone anticipated. The railroad transformed Red Hollow from a frontier outpost into a legitimate town. New businesses opened, population doubled. The social order that had seemed so fixed and permanent started shifting as new money and new ideas poured in. The workshop evolved with it. They opened that second location in Denver, managed by Annie Peterson, who proved to be as good at business as she was at design. They published a small catalog showcasing their work, which generated orders from places Clara had never even heard of. They hired a bookkeeper, a business manager, and eventually moved the main workshop to an even larger building near the new train station. Through it all, the core remained the same. Clara and Ayana, partners in every sense, creating beautiful things, teaching women who wanted to learn, building something that mattered. Thomas Webb proposed on a Tuesday evening in April, 2 years after that first dance. Clara said yes, not because she needed rescuing or security, but because she genuinely enjoyed his company and wanted to build a life with him. They married quietly that summer, and Thomas proved surprisingly supportive of Clara's work, even when it meant his wife was busier than he was. Caleb built a house on the edge of town, still close to the wilderness he loved, but near enough to visit the workshop regularly. He never said it explicitly, but Clara understood. He'd found his people. He was staying. 5 years after that night, when Clara's dress was destroyed, the workshop held an anniversary celebration. The building was packed with current and former employees, clients who'd become friends, and half the town. Even Mrs. Carter showed up, though she and Clara maintained polite distance. "Speech!" someone called. Clara looked at Ayana, who shook her head firmly. "This one's yours." Clara stood up, her heart racing the way it had that first night at the dance. But this time, she knew what she wanted to say. 5 years ago, I made a dress, spent 6 months on it because I had this idea that if I could just look right, act right, be right, then maybe I'd belong somewhere. She paused. That dress got destroyed by someone who thought I didn't deserve to belong. And for a while, I believed her. The room was completely silent. But then 2 people I barely knew decided to help me. Not because they owed me anything. Not because they expected anything in return, just because they saw someone who needed help and decided to act. Clara looked at Caleb, who was leaning against the back wall trying to look nonchalant, and Ayana, who was watching her with undisguised pride. That one act of kindness changed my life. It taught me that belonging isn't something you earn through perfect behavior or the right appearance. Belonging is what happens when you find people who see you, really see you, and decide you're worth standing beside. She gestured around the room. This workshop exists because Caleb Rourke gave me white deerskin he'd been saving for years, because Ayana Hollow Creek spent a night creating something beautiful for a stranger, because they believed I was worth investing in before I believed it myself. Clara's voice strengthened, and now we're doing the same thing, teaching women who've been told they have no options, creating opportunities where none existed, building something that says you don't have to be perfect or polished or approved of to matter. You just have to be willing to work, to learn, to believe you deserve a chance. She raised her glass. To second chances, to people who help strangers, to partnerships that change everything, and to every woman who's ever been told she's too much or not enough. You're exactly right. Keep being exactly who you are. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Clara sat down, her hands shaking, and felt Thomas squeeze her shoulder and Ayana grip her hand. Later, after most people had left, Clara stood in the workshop looking at the space they'd created. Fabric everywhere, tools arranged on tables, designs pinned to walls. Evidence of work, of purpose, of lives being built and futures being shaped. "Thinking big thoughts again?" Ayana asked, appearing beside her. "Thinking about that girl crying in the dirt, how far away she seems now." "She's not that far. She's still part of you, just not the only part anymore." Ayana was quiet for a moment. "You know what I'm proudest of?" "What?" "Not the business, not the success. The fact that we created something that outlasts us. Women we've trained are teaching other women. Techniques we've developed are being used in ways we never imagined. That legacy, that's what matters." Clara thought about Sarah Hayes, the little girl who'd watched them work during that hard winter. She'd written recently from Oregon, saying she was apprenticing with a seamstress and remembering everything Clara had taught her. She thought about Annie in Denver, about May, who was opening her own shop next month, about all the women who'd passed through the workshop and carried pieces of what they'd learned into their own futures. "We did good," Clara said softly. "Yeah, we did." The white deerskin dress still hung in Clara's closet at home, carefully preserved. She wore it occasionally to special events, and every time she did, people asked about it. She told them the story, all of it. The cruelty, the kindness, the choice to keep going when giving up would have been easier. Some people heard it as a story about a dress, but Clara knew better. It was a story about transformation, about the radical act of believing you deserve better than what you've been given, about building something from nothing with your own hands and the help of people who believe in you. It was a story about survival, yes, but more than that, it was a story about creation, about taking pain and humiliation and anger and transforming them into something beautiful and lasting and real. Years later, when Clara was older and the workshop had expanded to 5 locations across 3 states, a young woman would come to her, nervous, uncertain, carrying a dress that had been destroyed by someone cruel. And Clara would see herself in that young woman's eyes, the same fear, the same desperate hope, the same belief that maybe, just maybe, she deserved better. And Clara would say what Ayana had once said to her, "Show me what you've got. Let's see what we can make." Because that was the real legacy, not the dresses or the business or the money. The legacy was the pattern they'd established. See someone struggling, offer help, teach them to help themselves, watch them go out and help others in turn. A chain of kindness and competence and belief that spread far beyond Red Hollow, far beyond anything Clara and Ayana could have imagined that first night. The white dress had been destroyed. But from its destruction came something more valuable than any single garment. It came purpose. It came partnership. It came the understanding that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the catalyst for the best things you'll ever create. Clara never forgave Evelyn Carter. But in a strange way, she was grateful. Because without that cruelty, without that humiliation, without that moment of absolute devastation, Clara might have stayed invisible forever. She might never have discovered what she was capable of becoming. The fire that refined her hadn't been gentle. It had been brutal and painful and unfair. But she'd survived it, more than survived. She'd used it to forge herself into something stronger. And in the end, that was the point. Not that bad things happened. Bad things always happened. The point was what you did with them. Whether you let them destroy you or whether you gathered up the pieces and built something new. Clara had built an empire from a ruined dress and a single act of kindness. She'd built a life from scraps and determination and the refusal to disappear. And every woman who walked through the workshop doors, every apprentice who learned their trade, every dress that went out into the world carrying their combined vision, they were all proof that Clara Whitmore had been worth saving. She'd been worth seeing. She'd been worth everything.